The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
It's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. This is toward the very end, and it's a chapter titled Transforming Culture Through Politics. Many think it's just to fund tax cuts and subsidies for the rich, that the multimillionaire CEOs who've taken over almost all senior posts in government are just pigs at the trough. And this is a spectacular but ordinary form of self-serving corruption. It all seems so plausible, and there's even a grain of truth to it. But juicy deals for right-wing government insiders and their friends are just a byproduct of the real and deeper war against democracy. The neoconservatives are perfectly happy for us to think that they're just opportunists skirting the edges of legality and morality. But this is far more dangerous than simple government corruption. Indeed, the neoconservatives claim to be anti-government. As a leading spokesman for the neocon agenda, Grover Norquist told National Public Radio's Mara Liasson in a May 25, 2001 Morning Edition interview, quote, "I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub," end quote. Without a larger view, the issues of domestic spending, oil, neoconservative power plays in both major parties, the loss of liberties, anti-government rhetoric, and war in the Middle East all seem like separate and unconnected events. They're not. The new conservatives who've seized the Republican Party and who, through the Democratic Leadership Council, are nipping at the heels of the Democratic Party are not our parents' conservatives. Historic conservatives like Barry Goldwater, Harry Truman, and Dwight Eisenhower would be appalled, although their philosophical roots go back to Alexander Hamilton, who openly argued during the Constitutional Convention that royalty was the best form of government. The neocons have always been kept to the fringe. Indeed, the Reagan-Bush revolution flew in the face of traditional conservative ideals. As John Stockwell notes in his book, The Praetorian Guard, the U.S. Role in the New World Order, Reagan and Bush were proud of their contempt for their concerns of environmentalists, with Reagan once saying, "If you've seen one redwood, you've seen them all." Their Department of the Interior under James Watt sold off minerals and forests to campaign contributors at fire sale prices, and their EPA, in many cases, moved from prosecuting corporate polluters to legitimizing and protecting them under the guise of regulation. Although James Madison wrote in 1792 that an important role of government was to promote a strong middle class, quote, "by the silent operation of the laws, which, without violating the rights of property, reduce extreme wealth toward a state of mediocrity and raise extreme indigence toward a state of comfort," end of quote from James Madison. That was not a sentiment shared by those in the Reagan-Bush revolution. Instead, Reagan raised taxes on the middle class and working people while cutting taxes by more than 60% for the most wealthy in America. At the same time, he bragged that he'd eliminated more than 1,000 programs for poor people, and even proposed that poor school children should be content with ketchup as their daily vegetable. At the same time, the Reagan-Bush administration and later the George W. Bush administration worked hard to roll back the very individual liberties that America's founders had fought and died for. Dwight Eisenhower left office warning Americans about the dangers of the concentration of power resulting from corporations getting into bed with the military. But the Reagan-Bush and W. Bush administrations openly embraced these corporate powers, inviting them into the halls of governance and hungrily sucking at the teat of their campaign contributions. In the past, those promoting what is now called the New Conservative Agenda went by different names. The founders of America knew that for 6,000 years, civilized human beings had been ruled by one of three groups: kings, theocrats, or feudal lords. Kings held power by virtue of the threat of violence and continual warfare. Theocrats and popes held power by the people's fear of a god or gods, and feudal lords by wealth and the power that comes from throwing average people into poverty. The new idea of our founders in 1776 was to throw off all three of these historic tyrannies and replace them with a fourth way, the people being ruled by themselves, a government that derived its legitimacy and continuing existence solely from the approval of its citizens. Government of, by, and for we the people. They called it a constitutional Republican democracy. What we are seeing now in the conservative agenda is nothing less than an attempt to overthrow Republican democracy and replace it with a worldwide feudal state. The last time this happened, the feudalists took over a monarchy in North America. In December 1600, Queen Elizabeth I chartered the East India Company, ultimately leading to a corporate takeover of the Americas for the colonists that ended with the Boston Tea Party and 3 years later, the American Revolution. The corporate state partnership of the East India Company in the UK went on to conquer India, but eventually disintegrated as the British Empire faded and the British government, along with most of Western Europe, embraced somewhat more Jeffersonian forms of democracy. Conservatism raised its head again in the 20th century, revived by Franco, Hitler, and Mussolini. The Italian dictator even used the word corporatism to describe it and then later renamed it as fascism, a word defined by the American Heritage Dictionary as, quote, a system of government that exercises a dictatorship of the extreme right, typically through the merging of state and business leadership together with belligerent nationalism. The book is The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is, let me just set this up. As an hour ago, the official kick people of color off the voting rolls commission started their hearings or whatever here in Washington, D.C. 1 hour ago. Greg Palast is on the line with us, the investigative journalist, author, filmmaker, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, which you can watch cheap over at Amazon.com and GregPalast.com for all the information. You can tweet him at Greg_Palast, P-A-L-A-S-T. Hey, Greg, welcome back.
I'm glad to be with you. And by the way, the voters of color, their color is blue. That's what they're afraid of.
So, well, tell us about this then. Go for it.
Okay. About 1 hour ago, the Trump's commission on what he calls the Voter Fraud Commission, or as he puts it, or as it's officially called, the President's Advisory Commission on Voter Integrity, began its operation. This is Chris Kobach. We've talked about the Trump's vote thief in chief before, the Secretary of State of Kansas. This is their first meeting. Basically, well, I'm smiling and chuckling about it. The truth is they're rewriting the nation's voting laws to make sure that voters of color, and the color is blue that they don't want, will be pushed off the ballot. And the way that they do it is they push off voters of color, Black, Hispanic, Asian American off the voter rolls because they vote blue. And it just started. It's very funny because at a swearing-in ceremony, you have to understand this is an advisory council. You don't get swearing-in ceremonies. It's not they're not being appointed to the cabinet. They have no congressional authority, and they're not the Illuminati or the Masons.
So they're like pretending it's a real thing?
Yeah, it's like pretending. Did you see Raiders of the Lost Ark? Remember when the Nazis put on all this Jewish prayer garb so they could
right.
read the tablets?
So they could open the ark.
Kind of what's going on here. It's this weird ritual, but it's like in a way it's kissing Trump's mistletoe. So what's happening? And this commission, which is nominally headed by Mike Pence, not exactly your civil rights leader, our vice president, but it's run by Chris Kobach, the Secretary of State of Kansas. And they've begun with statements about how that the issue here in America is voter fraud. That is, people voting illegally. And in particular, Chris Kobach was pounding on his favorite topic, I guess mine too by default because I investigate him, is cross-check. He's saying that he found 118 people voting twice in his state, and maybe 18,000. Now you have to understand, he in his state he has powers to prosecute. He hasn't prosecuted 18 people for voting twice. It is a crime. You go to jail. And he certainly hasn't prosecuted 18,000. So what's going on here? Well, as you know, I have his lists, and his double voters are people like, I kid you not, Jose Garcia, who's voted apparently in several states under different middle names, sometimes junior, sometimes senior. Now, and I know you're thinking, wait, Jose Garcia is just a common name, not for Republican. So they're you can laugh at it as Looney Tunes, but this is deadly serious.
This is how these guys are planning on nailing down the Republican control of the United States, as more and more people have figured out that the Republican Party is the wholly owned subsidiary of the Koch network, the petro-billionaires, and the hard right, and the transnational corporate elite. I mean, that's pretty much it. But they,
you have to understand, Kobach. After our research for our film and for Rolling Stone, we uncovered that Kobach received $100,000 cash from the Koch brothers. So this is whom he owes. That's his real employer, not his government job in the Secretary of State of Kansas. The money comes from people like Koch, and this is very dangerous stuff.
Yeah.
When we have people who are rewriting the voter laws, funded by billionaires, who actually find vote suppression of voters of color to be a profit center. Right now, and they have right next to Kobach to create to have a blackface. They have Ken Blackwell is on the commission. You may remember him as the guy who swiped the state of Ohio in 2004 from John Kerry through every trick in the book, from long lines to rejecting ballots from black areas where people mailed in their absentee ballots on the wrong weight of paper which he had handed out to the black voters in these precincts. It was just amazing. So this is the guy so that's their balance. In other words, their idea of balance is right-wing Republicans who are white and right-wing Republicans who are black. That's their idea of a racial, of kind of the rainbow coalition there.
We're talking with Greg Palast, investigative journalist, filmmaker, author. His new movie, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, is mind-boggling. You gotta check it out. GregPalast.com. Greg, I want to play a short clip from Paul Weyrich, the co-founder of the Heritage Foundation, and a whole bunch of other things from the summer of 1980 when he was working on the Reagan campaign. Here he is.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome, good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Now, that was 1980. That was
Reagan's
37 years ago, right?
Yep.
And what is the arc of Republican voter suppression from then till now?
Well, what happens, that's how we had Reagan, but remember, it's a very different electorate. Most voters were white males, no longer true. And one of the things that's happened now is Chris Kobach has picked up that he's the vote thief in chief for Donald Trump. Look, let's be blunt. To pick up from Weyrich, is that there's just not enough white guys to elect a guy like Donald Trump or his Republican Congress. So what they have to do is they have to come up with various gimmicks to stop voters of color from voting. We've talked about cross-check, but they have many others. In fact, the latest thing we have from Chris Kobach, he had a secret meeting with Donald Trump in January before the inauguration. He handed Trump what he thought would be a secret memo. We now have a copy through a lawsuit from the ACLU. And it's what I predicted it would be exactly, a plan to amend into oblivion what's called the National Voter Registration Act.
That's the Motor Voter Act.
Voter law. The Motor Voter
makes it easy to register to vote when you get your driver's license renewed.
You get your driver's license. He wants to add a provision that you prove you're a citizen. Now, at first you say, well, yeah, only American citizens ought to vote. But go ahead, Tom, prove you're a citizen. The main proof of citizenship in the United States is a passport. That's automatic proof.
Which is only held by like 4 or 5% of Americans, right?
Who has passports? Rich white people, and for the most part, homies don't in South Central LA don't have their passports from their trips to the Alps. What we do have, and then the other is a certified copy of your registration. Now, he took this little citizenship test business on a test drive in his own state of Kansas, Mr. Kobach. And he was able to knock out 36,000 students off the voter rolls who couldn't prove because they couldn't get their certified original birth certificates. Students in Lawrence, Kansas, who couldn't prove that they were citizens of the United States. Before, by the way, you just check a box. Are you a citizen? Yeah, I am. If you're lying, you're going to go to prison. People don't lie because they don't want to go to prison over such a silly little thing.
Right.
But it worked. And then a federal judge says, hey, Kobach, you haven't proved that one single person among the 36,000 you blocked to vote are non-citizens. You haven't proven that. You haven't shown me one. And so the judge said, put those people back on the voter rolls under the National Voter Registration Act. That's what the judge relied on. Unfortunately, there is no right to vote in the United States Constitution, by the way. And therefore, if Kobach changes that voter law, there ain't nothing between Trump and re-election. And, because we're going to have a very shrunk electorate. Go ahead, prove you're a citizen. We know who's going to get knocked out by this. We know who's going to get challenged. We did have Karen Handel. If you remember, she was the one who just won the special race against John Ossoff.
Right, and she was formerly the Secretary of State of Georgia, responsible for cleaning the voting rolls.
And what she did was she was sending out letters to people with Hispanic last names, a guy in particular named Morales, who 3 times was required to spend an entire day in a courtroom, this American, proving he was an American. And his only crime was having a Hispanic last name. So this is no joke. This new ethnic cleansing by computer, what you have is lynching by laptop. This is what they want to make the law of the nation, and it's no joke. They are pulling it off. And so we're trying to raise the alarm. I was just this weekend with the Reverend Jesse Jackson and this senator named Bernie Sanders, who decided to I was with them in a private discussion, deciding that they would form an alliance to try to block Kobach, to try to block crosscheck. They're bringing in the top experts like, I don't know if you should know Barbara Arnwine, the nation's one voting attorney, voting rights attorney. It's going to be a campaign, hard fought. But, for Jesse Jackson, as far as he was concerned, this is no different than the march from Selma to Montgomery.
That's, Joe Madison makes this point all the time. It's no longer Jim Crow. It's James Crow Esquire.
Yeah, exactly. They're using, in other words, they're not in your face. They're not rednecks who's saying we don't like, N people. They just know that they don't like the color of their votes. And they're using very sophisticated methods and these claims of voter fraud. Remember, they never say, oh, yeah, a lot of white Republicans are committing voter fraud. Though it's interesting, Kobach has actually convicted 4 people of voter fraud. They're all Republicans. But they never mention that. What they're saying is it's the hordes of dark-skinned folk who they're targeting. And I'm not guessing because I have the list of people that Chris Kobach has targeted, at least by this system.
So what can people do, Greg? We have just a minute here before we're going to hit a hard break. What can people do?
Okay, what can people do? Well, go to gregpowles.com and get the information on Kobach and his cronies. My Rolling Stone article is up there, and other investigations I've done on Kobach.
Mark Pocan has dropped legislation to stop this. In the House of Representatives.
It's going to be a huge campaign. Go to the site. We have a little film with Bernie Sanders and with Jesse Jackson. I think you'll want to see this, know what the fight's about.
I agree. It's brilliant. I watched it this morning. Greg Palast, you're doing God's work, my friend. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And you can check it all out at gregpalast.com, GREGPALAST, and you can tweet Greg at Greg_Palast. We'll be right back. And welcome back. It's also Anything Goes summer, and I have a bit of a stack of news stories to share with you. We will get to as we continue through the day, and then some maybe through the week. Some of them are, pretty solid. They'll be solid a week from now, or even a few days from now. But anyhow, Phil, watching us on Free Speech TV in Minneapolis. Hey, Phil, what's on your mind?
Hi, this is Phil from Minneapolis, but I'm listening on KTNF AM 950.
Oh, you are? Well, you're in a commercial break right now.
That's,
you want me to put...
well, I'm listening on the phone, so it's not a problem.
Yeah, okay. I could put you back on hold if you want, and you could come back on when...
I'll be happy to talk about, Greg is always wonderful to listen to. He should be named the general of the Voter Rights Preservation Corps.
Yeah, I agree. You wanted to talk about the human origin story?
Yes. There's, I think the white supremacists all have a really serious problem, because if you have ever watched anything on public broadcasting concerning where humanity started in the Rift Valley, which is in Africa.
Right.
We are all Africans.
Oh, I know. I'm familiar with that, but you know the white supremacist narrative associated with that.
Actually, I'm not real heavy into white supremacy.
Okay, well, I just say it. I mean, the white supremacist narrative is that white people more recently emerged and therefore are the most recent evolutionary feature, essentially.
Yeah.
Now, you could argue that that's true of skin and nose having to do with adapting to climate, but they take it to the next step and say, oh, and that also, means intellect and self-regulation and all this kind of stuff. It's all in, the bell curve, for example. And the guy who was the co-author of that is now a big advisor to the Republicans. I'm sorry, what'd you say, Phil?
Yes, the bell curve, which is such a high authority.
Yes. Well, it was a New York Times bestseller, and it is the Bible to the racist Republicans.
How well did Mein Kampf sell when it came out in, what is it, 28 or 29 or 30 or 31? I mean,
yeah, it was around then. I don't know.
Just because they can fool some of the people some of the time, it doesn't mean they're fooling all of us.
Yes, to paraphrase Lincoln, I'm with you. But
it would make a very nice bumper sticker. We are all Africans.
Yeah, well, it's ultimately true. Or on the other hand, it sort of emphasizes those differences. I don't know. Just this whole thing. I mean, the use of the racialization of politics, particularly by the Republicans, particularly in the context of grievance, as opposed to the racialization of politics in the context of inclusion. I mean, these are, you could argue both of them are racialized politics, one for an evil purpose and the other for a beneficial purpose. And those are substantial differences.
Significantly, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Phil, thank you very much for the call. Next time you call, be sure and tell Nate, how you're listening to us so we get it cleaned up in our database, okay? Okay. Thanks a lot, Phil. Good talking with you, and thanks for listening to KTNF. We'll be right back. Stick around.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, there's a lot of other things. We have there's going to be several guests in our program today. It's going to be a fascinating day. There was an amazing article in the Sunday New York Times titled "An Ancient Cure for Alzheimer's." And I've talked before on this program, and in fact, there's a whole chapter about this in my book Threshold, in which I talked about how people who have certain kinds of parasites, the parasites that are less likely or extremely unlikely to kill you, the parasites that we co-evolved with, principally roundworms and hookworms. And, low-level infections of these things are probably carried by 3/4 of the people on the planet, or a large chunk of, of people on the planet, virtually all of them, people who are living on just a couple dollars a day. And they've been pretty much exterminated from the United States and from most of Western Europe. And that people who have those infections with these parasites don't get autoimmune diseases at the level that we do here. Lupus and MS and asthma and just this whole collection of diseases. And there's actually a business that is emerging. It's not legal in the United States, but it's being done in Europe and Australia right now, where they will infect you with these parasites. You don't even know it. They don't, you got a small infection, it doesn't bother you. But the parasites produce they're little worms in your gut, but they're almost microscopic. They produce in their bodies a chemical that downregulates our immune systems. And since humans have been living with these parasites, humans and pre-humans for millions of years, we actually have their DNA in our DNA, and our DNA is in their DNA. And by downregulating our immune system, they cause us to not, go crazy. Our immune system not to go crazy. And this is the case. This guy, Ben Trumbull, was in the Bolivian jungle working with indigenous men, the Simane people, indigenous Aboriginal hunter-gatherers, and discovered that they don't get Alzheimer's when they have parasitic infections, even though they have the gene for Alzheimer's, which 1 in 200 of us have. It's actually more common among many of these Aboriginal people. And interestingly, if they have these parasitic infections, they never get dementia. And these are people who live into their 90s. And this is, on the edge of just flipping medicine upside down on its head. Anyhow, we'll be back. I've got other actual political news for you, and we'll be taking your calls as well. It's Anything Goes Summer. In fact, we'll pick up your calls right after the break here at the bottom of the show. Stick around. Coming up on 28 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls and more of the news of the day. 15 states easily hacked. We'll get to that too right after this. Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Fight for the Four Freedoms, What Made FDR and the Greatest Generation Truly Great, by Professor Harvey J. Kaye, who's a professor of democracy and justice studies at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. This is from the introduction, page 1. We need to remember. We need to remember what conservatives have never wanted us to remember and what liberals have all too often forgotten. Now, after more than 30 years of subordinating the public good to corporate priorities and private greed, of subjecting ourselves to widening inequality and intensifying insecurities, and of denying our democratic impulses and yearnings, we need to remember. We need to remember who we are. We need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the men and women who rescued the United States from the economic destruction of the Great Depression and defended it against fascism and imperialism in the Second World War. We need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the men and women who not only saved the nation from economic ruin and political oblivion, but also turned it into the strongest and most prosperous country on earth. And most of all, we need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the men and women who accomplished all that in the face of powerful, conservative, reactionary, and corporate opposition, and despite all their own faults and failings, by making America freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. Now, when all they fought for is under siege, and we, too, find ourselves confronting crises and forces that threaten the nation and all that it stands for, now we need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the most progressive generation in American history. We are the children of the men and women who articulated, fought for, and endowed us with the promise of the four freedoms. On the afternoon of January 6, 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt went up to Capitol Hill to deliver his annual message to Congress. Just weeks earlier, he had defeated the Republican Wendell Willkie at the polls and won re-election to an unprecedented third term. But Roosevelt now faced a far greater challenge, one even more daunting than those he confronted in his first and second terms. Still stalked by the Great Depression, the United States was also increasingly threatened by the Axis power, Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, Imperial Japan. And with war already raging east and west, Americans had yet to agree about how to respond to the danger. The president, however, did not falter. He not only proceeded to propose measures to address the emergency, he gave dramatic new meaning to all men are created equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we the people of the United States, a new birth of freedom, and government of the people, by the people, and for the people. FDR knew about crises, but he knew as well what Americans could accomplish even in the darkest of times. Born in 1882, he had grown up privileged, the son of New York Hudson River gentry. Yet long before becoming president, he had suffered serious defeats and setbacks, none more devastating than contracting polio in 1921 at the age of 39. The disease left him permanently unable to stand up or walk without assistance. However, supported by his wife Eleanor and other family members and friends, he had risen above the paralysis to become the most dynamic political figure in the United States. Moreover, his experiences and encounters in the course of doing so had reaffirmed and deepened his already powerful faith and confidence in God, in himself, and in his fellow citizens, all of which had enabled him, in the face of the worst economic and social catastrophe in the nation's history, to defiantly state that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and then go on to proclaim this generation of Americans has a rendezvous with destiny. Armed with this faith and confidence and propelled by the popular energies that his words and elections elicited, he determinedly pursued the initiatives of relief, recovery, reconstruction, and reform known as the New Deal. Together, president and people severely tested each other, made mistakes and regrettable compromises, and suffered defeats and disappointments. Nevertheless, challenging each other to live up to their finest ideals, Roosevelt and his fellow citizens advanced them further than either had expected or even imagined possible. Confronting fierce, conservative, reactionary, and corporate opposition, they not only rejected authoritarianism, but also redeemed the nation's historic purpose and promise by initiating revolutionary changes in American government and public life and radically extending American freedom, equality, and democracy. They subjected big business to public account and regulation, empowered the federal government to address the needs of working people, mobilized and organized labor unions, fought for their rights, broadened and leveled the we and we the people, established a social security system, expanded the nation's public infrastructure, improved the environment, cultivated the arts, and refashioned popular culture. And while much remained to be done, they imbued themselves with fresh democratic convictions, hopes, and aspirations. Standing before the American people and their assembled representatives that early January day, the president surely believed their rendezvous with destiny had come. He told them straightforwardly that Americans were now confronting a moment unprecedented in the history of the United States. A moment unprecedented because never before had American security been as seriously threatened from without. And he refused to appease those who threatened our nation's safety. The book is The Fight for the Four Freedoms by Harvey K. Want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. You can support the Thom Hartmann Program and see video of our entire 3-hour show over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Next Tuesday in New Hampshire, the state is holding an election, and Democrat Kevin Kavanaugh has a good shot at the New Hampshire State Senate. A nice piece about this by Carolyn Fiddler over at dailycoast.com. So what did the Republican Party do, given that there's a Democrat who might actually grab a Senate seat in the state Senate? Well, Governor Chris Sununu, Republican Governor Chris Sununu, quoting from this piece in Daily Coast, just signed a heinous new law that will impose onerous new residency requirements on New Hampshire voters and legalize intimidation tactics to verify where voters live. The Republican-controlled House and Senate sent the measure to Sununu's desk after passing on party line votes. The new law will require voters who register within 30 days of an election to show additional documentation to prove that they're not lying about where they live and that they intend to live there long term. If you don't have that required documentation when you show up, you'll be able to cast a provisional ballot, which won't be counted unless you submit that required intent to stay documentation within a few days. If otherwise duly registered voters fail to submit that proof, the new law empowers state election officials to visit their homes and bring in the state's Secretary of State's office for potential investigation. Yes, we are talking serious intimidation here. It's amazing. Margie in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. Hey, Margie, what's on your mind today?
I'm concerned about, again, the voting and voter IDs. I was actually listening to the truck driving channel this morning, where obviously things like driver's license is very important to us.
Right.
There was a driver who started the process of renewing his commercial driver's license, which obviously he has jumped through hoops before to get this. It took him 8 months and approximately $600 to get his permanent renewal. Now, imagine if your life does not depend on it, who's going to spend that kind of time and that kind of money getting an ID to vote?
Well, not only that, now Chris Kobach wants to make it that even a commercial driver's license isn't good enough. You've got to bring your passport, which only 5% of Americans have.
And there was a second article that I just read this morning regarding Wisconsin, and that last election, 200,000 people were disenfranchised because of our voter ID law.
Right, and most of them probably didn't even know it, because when they showed up to vote, they were simply told, oh, here's a provisional ballot, just cast this. And they had no idea the provisional ballot means a ballot that won't be counted unless you show up at the Secretary of State's office within the next 3 days with proof of who you are and all this other, with your passport, basically, and the whole song and dance. So, yeah, this is a big deal, Margie. This is a really big deal. And I saw an article over the weekend about a guy who took 5 years to renew his ID. Back to you.
Showing up, if you have a post office box, you're doomed because that does not prove your residency.
Right. Yeah. And
so all these people that now have post office box to get their Amazon, they might lose the right to vote because of it.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. The Republicans are on a full-out tear right now to suppress the vote as much as possible because, as Paul Weyrich said back in 1980 when he was working on the Reagan campaign, frankly, as the voting, our leverage in the election, quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down. And that has been true of the Republican Party ever since they sold out to corporate interests back in the 50s. I mean, this is just arguably even long before. Actually, I'd say back in the 1880s. It's been going on that long. Margie, thank you for the call, and thanks for listening to Sirius XM. And I share your outrage, and please keep spreading the word, the good word. Thank you, Margie. Ken in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Ken, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I just actually I had a couple of things. One that kind of ties into the racism associated with the voter suppression is there's a book that won the National Book Award, I believe it was last year, by a guy named Ibram X. Kendi. It's called Stamped from the Beginning. I just started that one. But the whole premise of the book is that his idea, he traces the history of racist ideas. And the premise is that it doesn't come from a place of ignorance and hatred like most people think. It actually comes from a self-serving place. So the first instance in the book that he goes over is Aristotle's climate theory, where he basically says if people come from a place that is either too hot or too cold, they're savages and not fit to be rulers. They're basically here for people that live in a temperate zone, like the place where he was at, to dominate the rest of everybody else.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of plays into the whole idea of, kind of the way Trump riled up his base when he really doesn't care about them at all. And they see it, and it's easy for anybody to see, but, they kind of just ignore it because he's feeding them, they're consumers of the hate, and he's actually a producer.
Yeah. Very, very well said, Ken. And that all the more the tragedy. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. John in Langley, Washington. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, I love your show. I got into politics last election cycle. I became a Bernie delegate. I doorbelled for Angie Hamola trying to beat Barbara Bailey, a Republican. I got really, really involved. And yesterday when you talked about Democrats, for the most part, being on the side of getting rid of these trade deals, I called last time to your show because both my senators.
Washington State is kind of the exception to that because Washington exports so much paper or so much wood for paper that they want the pretty much everybody institutionally, everybody in government in the state of Washington wants the trade deals.
Too.
Pardon me?
You're right. You're right, because all the port cities did that. All the Democrats in port cities did that.
Yep.
But if we all forfeit what's good for our country, for our specific needs, and not go with the big picture, and look at all the Democratic presidents. My point I'm trying to make is I got actually involved, and I got to tell you why I cannot be a Democrat anymore. I'm an independent, and Rick Larson won't support H.R. 676. I went to a town hall. He said he considers health care a right, and he could not explain how he could sit there and watch a lady cry about diabetic medicine, stealing money from her family. She can't do stuff for her own kids or other kids because of one kid, and he's going to tell us that it's a right, and he will not co-sponsor H.R. 676. So I've got Democrats that are supposedly representing me that don't represent me. Okay, That's what I'm saying. How can I vote for? It's like Plato said. You vote for them thinking that they're going to do right, and then do the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Trump is exactly what Plato said.
Yeah, I had this conversation with a Democratic member of Congress who does not come on this program a couple of weeks ago, and he was, I signed on to H.R. 676, but I did so reluctantly because it's a very imperfect bill. It's got all kinds of sweeteners for the pharma industry and for the insurance industry, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, you guys are making the perfect the enemy of the good. I mean, it's a starting point. It's just like Obamacare was a starting point. And,
exactly.
And go forward with that. I can't speak from personal knowledge of Rick Larson's positions on these things, but I'll take your word for it, John. But, that's probably the basis of his opposition, that it's not quite the clean, thing that the purists are wanting, but it's step by step. But yeah, it is, with regard to trade, it is problematic in some parts of the country because the old saying, Tip O'Neill's old saying, all politics is local, or maybe it was Ben Franklin's, but is very real. And sometimes local politics trumps, no pun intended, supersedes national politics and what's best for the country and for individual districts and things like that. John, thanks for the call. Good to hear from you. Let me encourage you though to reconsider your independent status. I think you'll find that you'll have a lot more power. Your voice will have more influence if you show up for the Democratic Party events, participate with the Democratic Party, get inside the Democratic Party, If you don't like the positions that they're taking, help rewrite the platform.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Don in Columbus, Ohio, watching us on Free Speech TV on the Dish Network. Hey, Don, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I'm here in Columbus, and you know, Bob Petrakis and Harvey Wasserman are here.
I know them both. They're brilliant guys, good guys.
Worked for years, and I saw Greg Pallas today on. So I've got a couple of questions, but the first one is, when will the Democratic Party make election integrity a major issue and push on it?
It's starting to happen. It's starting to happen. I've been screaming about this since 2000, and Bernie's been talking about it for all of the 11 years he was on my show. Bernie was talking about this stuff and how we should have paper ballots and everything else. And it's just, it takes them a while to get organized and figure stuff out, but I think that they're getting organized and they're figuring it out. Don.
Okay, and then the second one, Ari Berman.
Mm-hmm.
Is getting a lot of press about the election issue.
What about Ari?
Yeah, he's getting. I subscribe to his Twitter feed, and he had the article in the New York Times and Nation. Now he's at Mother Jones. Okay, almost all of his stuff is terrific. I'm a little concerned that he's spending too much emphasis on the Russia angle to the election.
I think the party as a whole is it's an issue. If there was interference in our elections, if it was consequential, particularly if it was greater than the damage done by others, this could be a big deal. But it's like at the end of the day, let's say Donald Trump gets indicted, convicted, and sent to prison for being a front guy for a foreign country. Okay. The Democrats still have to have a damn platform. They still have to run on something. They still have to make sure that the voters know what they're for, not just what they're against. And I'm frankly concerned that not enough of that is happening. It's just, but what can you say?
I agree totally with you. And to add to that, if the Democrats don't address the election issue, they're not going to win anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is something we've been saying since 2002 when we first saw a major redshift, right after the Help America Vote Act, the HAVA Act in 2002, passed $5.6 billion to the states to buy voting machines that could be hacked and could be manipulated, from companies that were affiliated with Republicans, whether it was ES&S and the Uresovich brothers, as I recall, or whether it was Diebold. John, I'm forgetting his last name now, the guy who was the CEO of Diebold, who wrote in 2004 that he looked forward to helping deliver Ohio for George W. Bush. And, it was Wally Odell was his name. That's right. It was the CEO of Diebold. And I remember, this is just like in the climate debate, there's a bunch of climate scientists who don't want to talk about worst case scenarios because they don't want to scare people. I remember back in the 2000s meeting with members of Congress here in Washington, D.C., myself and a few other people from Air America, and saying, you got to do something about these voting machines. And all of them saying, no, there's, it is a problem, but we don't want to tell people about it because then they'll be afraid to vote. And I'm like, no, they'll get pissed off and change things. That's why you tell people about things. But anyhow, Don, thank you for the call. Spot on. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with the Anything Goes Summer. Matt in Houston, Texas. Hey, Matt, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
My pleasure.
I want to make a couple of comments. Number one, this kind of reminds me of the beginning of, I'm talking about the Trump thing that's going on right now, the beginning of the Bush presidency when they were still trying to untangle some of the fads, and there were people in Florida coming up with votes that had been left in the back of buildings. And Enron happened, and all of the people in the White House had sold their Enron stocks the day before. And it was all kind of internal investigations going on. The Republican Party was trying to pass these wiretapping laws that the Republican Congress wouldn't let them pass. And all of a sudden, right in the middle of all of this, and if it hadn't been for this incident, I think that the whole Bush administration would have been drummed out of the court within the first 6 months, 9/11.
Yeah. Yeah, and Bush was viewed as an illegitimate president by, if not a majority, certainly a substantial minority of Americans. And he was politically impotent as a consequence of that. They were getting nothing done except that Dick Cheney was, working really hard on the Energy Committee to carve up the Iraqi oil fields, and they were destroying labor laws, and they were destroying EPA laws just like the Trumps are doing right now.
Exactly.
But they really didn't have the power that they needed or that they wanted. Bush really wanted to privatize Social Security. It's what he ran for Congress on back in the 70s when he had his failed attempt to run for the House of Representatives from Texas. And they couldn't do it, and Bush had told Mickey Herskowitz if he ever had a rationale for invading Iraq, he would do it, and he would do it in a smart way, unlike the stupid way his father had done it with his 100-hour war. He would do it with a real war that would carry over an election cycle and give him political capital. And you'll recall in 2005, right after Bush was reelected, he went on like a 10-city tour trying to push the idea of privatizing Social Security. In every city that he went to and every speech that he gave, national approval of the idea of privatizing Social Security shrank to the point where finally Bush just gave up and said, okay, enough of that, and I'll just be a war president, But yeah, I'm with you. It's a big deal.
What my point is right now, I really don't think that this past election, Trump getting elected, it didn't make any sense. All the exit polls were showing that Hillary was way out in front. I think it was more than the Russians that had put Trump in the White House. And I think that the extent that this Republican Party has gone to destroy democracy in this country has got to the point where it's about to explode, and it's going to explode in a much worse way than 9/11 did. And we're going to have one of the first times in the history of this country a dictator, and that dictator is going to be Donald Trump.
I sure hope you're wrong, Matt, but it is a scenario that in the event of another 9/11 kind of attack is very, very possible. Matt, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Cy in Minneapolis, listening on KTNF. Hey, Cy, what's up?
Hi, Tom. My question is with regard to raising the cap in Social Security. So if that occurs, that means more and more money is going to go into the Social Security Trust Fund, right?
Right.
So does that not – so there's going to be a lot more money. It'll make it more soluble for a longer period of time. Does that not mean then that the ultra-rich, since they have contributed proportionately more, that they then in turn will also be entitled to receiving back proportionately more? Therefore, it ends up being somewhat of a wash as to whether or not there's enough money there to help keep the system afloat.
The short answer side of your question is no. If the wealthy right now, if you've been making a couple $100,000 a year for your entire life, if you're in the top 1%, right now, and you take Social Security, I think you can make like $30,000 a year or something in that neighborhood. I mean, that's the kind of ceiling of what you can get out of Social Security after 66 or 67, whatever the retirement age is. It's 66 right now, I think. And that cap on what you can get might raise from 30,000 to say 40 or 50,000 if the super rich start paying in. But the fact of the matter is that no, we would do it in a progressive fashion so that the Everybody is paying that 3% of their income into Social Security. And if your income's $1 billion, you're paying 3% in because that's how insurance for the entire country works. Keep in mind, Social Security is not a retirement fund. It is poverty insurance. It's insurance, at least the after 65 part of it, the 2/3 of it that is for people who are over 65 years old. It is insurance against poverty and old age. When Social Security was put into place, literally half of Americans were living in utter poverty. And in the 30s, utter poverty meant literally dying from hypothermia in the winter and dying from heat stroke in the summer and very often going without food or medicine for periods of time. Social Security fixed that problem. And the way insurance works is everybody's in. And in this case, if somebody is a billionaire and, they're going to end up supporting our Social Security system, it's a good thing for them because they no longer live in a country where there is horrible poverty among seniors. There's, it's what, I'm forgetting his name, the guy who was with the Patriotic Millionaires Group, Morris. Oh, what was Morris's last name? He was on our show a couple months ago. Morris Pearl. Thank you, Troy. What Morris Pearl said, he said, I don't want to be a rich man in a poor country. And that's really what it's about. Cy, thanks for the call. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Hey, Tom, I had a question for you about Paul Ryan, something Paul Ryan said. And if I can give Paul Ryan credit for anything, he doesn't really engage in conspiracy theory or rhetorical flourish. I think that's how he separates himself from the Trumpologues out there. But he said something that caught my attention. He said that as far as this health care thing goes, he knows what the Democrats are really up to. He says they're trying to, institute a single-payer system or health care for all, and that definitely would not be in the best interest of the United States.
Well, he's correct about the first half and wrong about the last half.
Well, I know, and I was like, well, where is he getting this from? And now, I'm wondering if he's getting it. From what I see, all the Democrats are trying to do is prevent the repeal of Obamacare.
Oh, no, H.R. 676 has over 100 sponsors now for the first time. H.R. 676 is the Medicare for All legislation that John Conyers has been trying to get passed through Congress for 15, 20 years, forever. And maybe it's less, not that long, but and it's well over 100 sponsors right now. So most of the Democratic caucus, or a good chunk of the Democratic caucus, at least in the House of Representatives, has signed on to this thing. And you've got Democrats, Bernie put this on the national stage, on the national platform, single payer for all, Medicare for all. And increasingly, you're seeing Democrats say, yes, this is the way we need to go. And I think that that's a good thing.
So you think that's where Paul Ryan was getting that from? That
he's just looking around.
Conspiracy theory thing?
Yeah, he's just looking around. Democrats are starting to talk about Medicare for all. It works in other countries. Every other developed country in the world has either a national health care system, like the United Kingdom does, or has single-payer health care, like pretty much all the other European countries do, and Canada and Mexico and Costa Rica. And, we can do it, too. We'll be back. Thank you, Dave.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
From UN headquarters in
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Fight for the Four Freedoms, What Made FDR and the Greatest Generation Truly Great, by Professor Harvey J. Kaye, who's a professor of democracy and justice studies at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. This is from the introduction, page 1. We need to remember what conservatives have never wanted us to remember and what liberals have all too often forgotten. Now, after more than 30 years of subordinating the public good to corporate priorities and private greed, of subjecting ourselves to widening inequality and intensifying insecurities, and of denying our democratic impulses and yearnings, we need to remember. We need to remember who we are. We need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the men and women who rescued the United States from the economic destruction of the Great Depression and defended it against fascism and imperialism
in the Second World War. We need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the men and women who not only saved the nation from economic ruin and political oblivion, but also turned it into the strongest and most prosperous country on earth. And most of all, we need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the men and women who accomplished all that in the face of powerful, conservative, reactionary, and corporate opposition, and despite all their own faults and failings, by making America freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. Now, when all they fought for is under siege, and we, too, find ourselves confronting crises and forces that threaten the nation and all that it stands for, now we need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the most progressive generation in American history. We are the children of the men and women who articulated, fought for, and endowed us with the promise of the four freedoms. On the afternoon of January 6, 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt went up to Capitol Hill to deliver his annual message to Congress. Just weeks earlier, he had defeated the Republican Wendell Willkie at the polls and won re-election to an unprecedented third term. But Roosevelt now faced a far greater challenge, one even more daunting than those he confronted in his first and second terms. Still stalked by the Great Depression, the United States was also increasingly threatened by the Axis power, Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, Imperial Japan. And with war already raging east and west, Americans had yet to agree about how to respond to the danger. The president, however, did not falter. He not only proceeded to propose measures to address the emergency, he gave dramatic new meaning to all men are created equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we the people of the United States, a new birth of freedom, and government of the people, by the people, and for the people. FDR knew about crises, but he knew as well what Americans could accomplish even in the darkest of times. Born in 1882, he had grown up privileged, the son of New York Hudson River gentry. Yet long before becoming president, he had suffered serious defeats and setbacks, none more devastating than contracting polio in 1921 at the age of 39. The disease left him permanently unable to stand up or walk without assistance. However, supported by his wife Eleanor and other family members and friends, he had risen above the paralysis to become the most dynamic political figure in the United States. Moreover, his experiences and encounters in the course of doing so had reaffirmed and deepened his already powerful faith and confidence in God, in himself, and in his fellow citizens, all of which had enabled him, in the face of the worst economic and social catastrophe in the nation's history, to defiantly state that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and then go on to proclaim this generation of Americans has a rendezvous with destiny. Armed with this faith and confidence and propelled by the popular energies that his words and elections elicited, he determinedly pursued the initiatives of relief, recovery, reconstruction, and reform known as the New Deal. Together, president and people severely tested each other, made mistakes and regrettable compromises, and suffered defeats and disappointments. Nevertheless, challenging each other to live up to their finest ideals, Roosevelt and his fellow citizens advanced them further than either had expected or even imagined possible. Confronting fierce, conservative, reactionary, and corporate opposition, they not only rejected authoritarianism, but also redeemed the nation's historic purpose and promise by initiating revolutionary changes in American government and public life and radically extending American freedom, equality, and democracy. They subjected big business to public account and regulation, empowered the federal government to address the needs of working people, mobilized and organized labor unions, fought for their rights, broadened and leveled the we and we the people, established a social security system, expanded the nation's public infrastructure, improved the environment, cultivated the arts, and refashioned popular culture. And while much remained to be done, they imbued themselves with fresh democratic convictions, hopes, and aspirations. Standing before the American people and their assembled representatives that early January day, the president surely believed their rendezvous with destiny had come. He told them straightforwardly that Americans were now confronting a moment unprecedented in the history of the United States. A moment unprecedented because never before had American security been as seriously threatened from without. And he refused to appease those who threatened our nation's safety. The book is The Fight for the Four Freedoms by Harvey K. die. It's
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and super pleased to have Dave Daly in the studio with us. He is the author of Rat Effed. I guess you can figure out what that, why your vote doesn't count. I believe we talked with you when the hardcover came out. I know we did on TV. I think we did here on radio also. The paperback is also now out. There we go. Pointed to the right camera. And Dave, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
It's great having you with us.
Appreciate it.
And just you can tweet Dave at Dave Daly, DAVEDALEY 3. And is there a website for the book?
Perfect. That's where you can find me.
So Twitter's best. Okay,
exactly.
Great. And of course, the book is available at your favorite. So why does my vote not count? The subtitle of your book.
Well, what happened is we are a deeply divided, a 50-50 country in so many ways, and yet Republicans have complete control over the White House, the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House, 69 of 99 state legislative chambers, 33 governors. That's a modern high. 25 trifectas. They have achieved all of this with a really audacious use of the gerrymander, the oldest political trick in the book. They've redistricted their way to complete power, even when they get fewer votes. If Democrats get more votes for the U.S. House in 2018, just as they did in 2012, you will have Republicans in control of the White House, the Senate, and the U.S. House, all with fewer votes.
Wow. So, well, you can't redistrict a Senate seat.
You can't redistrict a Senate seat, but you can certainly use these gerrymandered state legislatures to pass voter ID and other voter suppression laws that in a close election make a decided difference. Right. We know what these voter ID laws do. They have a 7.7% dampening of Democratic turnout. It's double-digit dampening for Latinos and African Americans. The studies on this that compare 2008 and 2012 in states with and without these laws are startling. And the first thing that these gerrymandered state legislatures do, and that's where it all starts in state legislatures, is they go after voting rights, and they go after labor rights, and then they go after women's rights. This is not a coincidence. It's an organized process.
Right. Because labor traditionally funds the Democratic Party. Women very often vote Democratic. What was the other group?
And voting rights.
Oh, and
voting rights.
People in favor of voting rights.
These are the three.
They just want to vote. Damn it.
These are the three things that these legislatures do, and in lots of states, whether it's Ohio, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Republicans have figured out how to rule with fewer votes.
How is it that Republicans figured this out and Democrats didn't?
Boy, it's amazing, isn't it? Because the gerrymander has been with us. You can trace it back to Patrick Henry. It goes back to 1788, trying to screw James Madison out of a seat in the very first Congress. But Republicans got desperate, essentially, after 2008. You've got the first African-American president. You have a Democratic super majority in the Senate. You have the Democrats return to power in the U.S. House. And Republicans are staring down a demographic time bomb that a lot of people think at the time could have rendered them a minority party for a generation. It didn't exactly work out that way. They had to come up with a plan. And what a group of savvy strategists understood was that 2008 might have been a deeply consequential election, but 2010 might matter more because it's a 0 year, and we redraw all of the legislative districts at the state level and the congressional level after the census. They launch a plan called Red Map. They invest $30 million in it, which is chump change, really, in modern-day politics. And they go after targeting state legislative chambers. There were 16 states in which control of the legislature was plus or minus 4 seats. And they invested a lot of money in trying to tip control of those chambers so that they would have complete control over redistricting in 2011. It's a plan called a Red Map. They targeted 107 state legislative races in 16 states. That gave them complete control, no one else in the room, over the drawing of 193 of our 435 legislative.
Wow.
This
sounds a little too slick for the Republican Party. Was the Koch network and their companies,
involved.
Yeah, Americans for Progress or Americans for Prosperity, I guess, or whatever it is. They're actually more well-funded, well-organized, have more employees, have more offices nationwide than the Republican Party itself does. To what extent did this come out of the billionaire Koch network as opposed to having just come out of the generic GOP?
Well, it is headquartered at something called the Republican State Leadership Committee, which is run by Ed Gillespie, who, of course, is now running to become governor of Virginia, which would create the 26th Republican trifecta if he wins. And it's Gillespie. Karl Rove is on the fringes of this. A really savvy strategist named Chris Jankowski comes up with the idea and launches it. But
He's the guy who presented it back in 2008.
Exactly. Right. But the funding of all of this, a lot of it comes from the typical Republican sources: a Chamber of Commerce, Altria, a Walmart, AT&T.
Altria is the tobacco company.
Exactly. So it's a lot of the kind of big time Republican donors.
Mike Pence used to be a lobbyist for the tobacco industry, didn't he?
Was that true?
I'm pretty sure. I know he wrote op-eds about how tobacco doesn't kill you.
That would not
2000
shock me. But the amazing thing about this as well is that Citizens United comes down in January of 2010, right in the middle of the planning for this Red Map operation. So a lot of the money becomes really hard to track as a result of that. So there's a lot of dark money coming in. There's a lot of money coming into the Republican State Leadership Committee. And where it goes, often it becomes really hard to track. There's a lot of Koch money involved in North Carolina. There's a lot of Art Pope, who's kind of the Koch brother of North Carolina.
Yeah, he's the local billionaire, sort of like the DeVos family in Michigan.
Exactly. And then there's a lot of DeVos money in Michigan that goes into launching this operation.
Yeah. So what do we do about this?
Boy, it is really, really hard to unravel.
And in fact, actually, if I can expand that question, I just yesterday, the day before, read an article about how the Census Bureau right now in the Trump administration is being essentially defunded. And there's speculation that the reason for that is that it's a little more expensive to count low-income people than it is to count wealthy white Republicans.
This is the danger.
And because you've got to go into communities of in communities of poverty essentially, and find people,
And then the question becomes not only will this census be funded properly and will it be competently administrated, two things we probably can't count on. But the third piece of this is what happens in all of these communities of color when folks from the government show up with a clipboard asking who lives here.
Right.
We are almost certain in this political environment to undercount these groups at a crucial, crucial time.
Right. Well, the Census Bureau used to weight those numbers, didn't they?
Well, and
just for that very reason?
And that became a deeply political topic back in the 2000s.
And the Republicans did away with that?
Republicans fought hard against that. I think it will be very difficult to imagine a proper weighting of these numbers in a Congress that is so completely controlled by the Republican Party.
Amazing, amazing. So back to the question of what do we do about it?
Well, there has to be a short-term solution and a long-term solution. Democrats are down by 23 seats in the U.S. House. They are targeting a lot of the suburban seats where Clinton did well, but perhaps elected a Republican. It would be terrific for Democrats to take back the House, but this is a structural problem that is rooted in the states. Democrats could take back the House of Representatives. It would not make a difference when it comes to who is in charge of drawing these lines. It's still going to be the Ohio state legislature, which is 66-33 Republican, Pennsylvania 121-81, North Carolina 74-45. These state legislatures are more deeply gerrymandered than our national Congress, which is saying something. So Democrats have to find a way to rebuild their infrastructure in all of these states and start working at tipping state legislative chambers back. A wave election is not measured in whether or not Congress comes. It's the net gain or loss of state legislative chambers that have an influence over redistricting. That's one short-term process.
Is the Democratic Party, is there evidence that the Democratic Party has figured this out and is going?
The Democratic Party is a very top-down party. They appear to me to be focused very much on trying to take back the House of Representatives. That to me is fool's gold in many ways.
Right. It's like dealing with the symptoms rather than the cause.
They just lit $30 million on fire in Georgia's 6th, the most expensive House race in history. That $30 million would have been terrific if it had been targeted towards, say, Virginia, a gerrymandered state where the entire assembly will be up for election.
State races.
In state races. That has to be the focus. There are also some crucial governor's races in 2018 where these governors have a veto power over bad maps. If Democrats want to win back a seat at the table in 2018, they ought to think about winning one statewide race in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Florida.
Whether that's taking the legislature or taking the governor's office.
The legislature in those
one branch of the legislature.
The legislature in those states are going to be very hard to take back
because of the gerrymander.
But the governor is on the ballot. Win one race, at least have a say in the process.
Right. Right. So this is another statement essentially about how important it is that people actually participate in the upcoming election, the 2018 election, when people more than half of registered voters typically don't show up to vote in midterm elections.
There's a new poll out today, a Washington Post ABC News poll that shows that Republicans have more enthusiasm to show up and vote in the 2018 midterms than Democrats. If folks are talking about a blue wave, it is a fantasy at this point.
Well, that's not good. That's not good. So we really have to be waking people up to this. We're talking with David Daley. The new book is Rat Effed, Why Your Vote Doesn't Count, and with a new epilogue by the author. Dave, you're doing great work.
I appreciate it, Tom. So are you.
Thank you. Thanks for dropping by.
We'll fight on.
Yeah. We will keep the word going. You can tweet Dave at Dave Daley, DaveDaley, the number 3, at Dave Daley, number 3, and his book Rat F, as in that word that I can't say on the radio. Check it out.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And once again, you can tweet Dave at Dave Daley, number 3. The book is Rat F. We'll be back. And welcome back. Oh, my. Dolores in Seattle, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Dolores, what's on your mind?
Well, Tom, I'm kind of coming back after this fellow sounded so doom and gloom. I'm really feeling inspired by my young people here in Washington. They were so devastated, my grandchildren were, with Bernie losing, and some of them weren't going to vote. They worked so hard for Bernie. Well, I've got them going back to the meetings, and they're very impressed with some of the Democratic meetings they're going to.
Good.
And they're so involved right now. One granddaughter went to one of the district meetings, and she said, "Granny, I'm impressed. You had a woman as your chair. You had every type of color person there could be, every type," she said, "and everybody had a voice. And we are getting more people to our meetings than we've had in years."
Yeah, that's marvelous. I mean, this is in response to Dave Daley's bad news. I mean, this is what we need to be doing, is we need to get people inside the Democratic Party. We need to reinvigorate this party in this process. And, we need to move all of this forward. Dolores, thank you for sharing the good word with your grandkids and with your friends, and thank you for calling into the program today.
Thank you, Tom,
Thank you, Dolores. Good talking with you. Eula in Attapulgos, Georgia. Am I saying it right, Eula?
Yes.
Hi. Thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hi, Mr. Hartman. I have a question to ask you. I called Senator Bernie Sanders' office and Senator Elizabeth Warren's office and gave them the idea. I don't know how good this is, so I'm going to ask you, what if voting could become free speech? Do you think that would make a difference?
Wow. That's actually
if voting can be free speech, why can't voting become free speech?
That is brilliant, Eula. That is absolutely brilliant. You're absolutely right. If the evil geniuses who brought us Citizens United could say, billionaires spending money is free speech, then, why couldn't we be pushing the idea that my vote is my free speech? I have a right.
That's right, because you have to go to vote. You decided who you want to represent you.
Yeah.
Money only corrupts and hurt people.
Yeah. So extending the First Amendment to include the vote would be a way. The problem is it would require a progressive Supreme Court, which we haven't had since we haven't had in a long, long time. I'm not even sure since.
I did something stupid.
Yeah.
I called. I called the Supreme Court. Want to speak to Judge Sotomayor. The lady told me I have to write a letter. I was going to put that to her.
Yeah, Sonia Sotomayor. Yeah, she would.
I was going to put that to her, but the girl told me I would have to write her a letter. But since I'm legally blind and unable to write, I said I was going to call back and get the address and have my granddaughter go online and send her an email.
That might be a good idea. I'm not sure about the email. I'm guessing that they get a lot of that stuff. But politicians, and I realize the Supreme Court justices are not supposed to be thought of as politicians, but frankly they are, tend to pay more attention to physical letters that they get. And it takes a while to get them to them here in Washington, D.C., because everything gets inspected for anthrax, so it takes weeks. But I would strongly suggest that your granddaughter write that letter for you. You can sign it and mail it to Sonia Sotomayor. You never know. Eula, thank you.
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate Rebels today.
Welcome back. Okay, back to the news of the day for a few moments here, and then we'll pick up your phone calls right after the break at the bottom of the hour. 15 states use easily hackable voting machines. Jessica Schulberg, writing in the Huffington Post. In 2006, she writes, Princeton computer science. Now, keep in mind, this is 11 years ago. Princeton computer science professor Edward Felton received an anonymous message offering him a Diebold AccuVote TS, one of the most widely used touchscreen voting machines at the time. It was really hard to get them then because the Diebold and other companies were asserting that these were their property. They didn't actually sell them to the states. They leased them. The stuff in them was their intellectual property. It was just impossible for a computer scientist to get a copy, and somebody had one. Felton was intrigued enough that he sent a 25-year-old science graduate student, Alex Halderman, on a mission to retrieve the AccuVote TS from a trench coat-clad man in an alleyway near New York's Times Square. Felton then spent the summer working in secrecy in an unmarked room in a basement in a building, reverse engineering the machine. In September of 2006, they published a research paper and accompanying video detailing how they could spread malicious code to the AccuVote TS to change the record of the votes to produce whatever outcome the code writers desired. And the code could spread from one machine to another like a virus. And here's where it gets really grim. That was more than a decade ago, but Georgia still uses the AccuVote TS. Georgia is one of 5 states, the others are Delaware, Louisiana, New Jersey, and South Carolina, that rely entirely on these touchscreens, DREs they're called, direct recording, I forget what the E stands for voting. 10 other states use a combination of paper ballots and DRE machines that leave no paper trail. Many use a newer version of the AccuVote, known as the TSX, even though computer scientists have demonstrated that that machine, too, is vulnerable to hacking. Others use the Sequoia AVC Advantage, which Princeton professor Andrew Apple demonstrated could be similarly manipulated in a 2007 legal filing. Apple bought Sequoia machine, not the company Apple, but the Princeton professor Andrew Apple, bought a Sequoia machine online for $82 and demonstrated that by removing 10 screws, he could easily replace the Sequoia's memory card with a modified version that would alter the outcome of an election. So this is what he said. Basically, nothing has changed except we're now more aware of the threat. This is from Halderman, who is now a computer science professor at the University of Michigan. It's amazing. It's like at every level, the oligarchs and the Republicans who represent the interests of the oligarchs have gamed the system. And the only chance we have is to show up in overwhelming number in opposition.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
That means get active, get involved, participate, show up, tag you're it, all that stuff. It's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. In the weeks after 9/11, Rodale Press reached out to a bunch of folks, me, the Dalai Lama, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Rabbi David Wolpe, Thich Nhat Hanh, Chuck Colson, Neil Donald Walsh, and asked for thoughts about a spiritual response to the attack on America. The result was a book, From the Ashes. And this is from the chapter that I wrote, The Goddess of Democracy, a Sacred Archetype to Heal the World. People argue that the terrorist attacks against the United States reflect a war between one religion and another, or between the poor and rich of the world. While there may be an element of truth to each, I'd suggest that the real war here is between the 11th century and the 21st century. And until our leaders figure that out, we may miss some great opportunities. Back in the Dark and Middle Ages, the Catholic Church ruled Europe. Women were often forbidden to go out in public unless properly covered, and were explicitly the property of men. Justice was swift and severe, ranging from disfigurement to torture to death in horrific ways, and most often meted out with the approval or supervision of clerics. The power behind the power of all the royal families of Europe was the Pope. On November 27th, 1095, Pope Urban gave one of history's most famous speeches to the Council of Clermont in France, calling for a holy war against Islam to unite factious Europe. Dr. E.L. Skip Knox of Boise State University in Idaho summarized the Pope's speech. The noble race of Franks must come to the aid of their fellow Christians in the East. The infidel Turks are advancing into the heart of Eastern Christendom. Christians are being oppressed and attacked. Churches and holy places are being defiled. Jerusalem is groaning under the Saracen yoke. The Holy Sepulchre is in Muslim hands and has been turned into a mosque. The Franks must stop their internal wars and squabbles. Let them go instead against the infidel and fight a righteous war. God himself will lead them, for they will be doing his work. There will be absolution and remission of sins for all who die in the service of Christ. Here they are poor and miserable sinners. There they will be rich and happy. Let none hesitate. They must march next summer. God wills it. Thus began a war between two different medieval cultures, 11th century Catholic and 11th century Muslim. Over the next few centuries, the Catholics, with their battle cry of Deus Vult, God wills it, were often victorious against the Muslims, whose only crime defined by the Pope was that they were living in the Holy Land of the Catholic Church. Medieval historian Raymond of Aguilles wrote the following eyewitness account of the attack and seizure of Jerusalem in 1099 by the triumphant Christian crusaders. Quote, "Some of our men cut off the heads of their enemies, others shot them with arrows so they fell from the towers, others tortured them longer by casting them into the flames. Piles of heads, hand, and feet were to be seen in the streets of the city. It was necessary to pick one's way over the bodies of men and horses. But these were small matters compared to what happened at the Temple of Solomon, a place where religious services were ordinarily chanted. What happened there? If I tell the truth, it will exceed your powers of belief. So let it suffice to say this much at least, that in the temple and portico of Solomon, men rode in blood up to their knees and bridle reins." End of quote. In the 900 or so years since the early Crusades, both Christianity and Islam have undergone profound changes. The Protestant Reformation shook Christianity to its core, and the Renaissance in Europe wrought huge transformations in both Christianity and Judaism. Perhaps the most critical change came about in the 18th century when Jefferson, Madison, Franklin, and others synthesized the highest ideals of Greek, Roman, and Iroquois thought and culture to create the United States of America. In doing that, they ignited the flame of liberty, bringing into the world an archetype that to this day inspires hope worldwide. As America grew and our ideas of Republican democracy spread around the world, further transformations of the world took place. Another turning point was when modern science challenged the medieval worldview of the church in the Scopes monkey trial of 1925. Although Clarence Darrow lost that case, its widespread publicity began a dramatic and lasting process of change across the world. The American dream is a powerful and pervasive force in the world, even if the sometimes imperialistic behavior of our transnational corporations is often at odds with our own ideals. That dream has wafted over the entire world and is still so powerful that people are willing to die for it. In China, the Tiananmen Square protesters marched to their doom in 1989, carrying a 37-foot-tall papier-mâché replica of the Statue of Liberty, which they had renamed the Goddess of Democracy. Of course, there are still pockets of medieval perspective in the Christian world. The post-disaster comments of Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, who said they had just witnessed the wrath of their God, who had lifted the veil and allowed the terrorists to act because of their God's anger over homosexuals, liberals, and the ACLU, reveals that such a worldview is still alive and well in a small fringe of Christianity. Some Christians are still today willing to commit terrorist acts of murder or mass murder. Timothy McVeigh and those who murdered numerous abortion providers all claimed their acts are grounded in Christianity and biblical teachings. And just as 21st century Christianity still has its own pockets of medieval worldview, so does 21st century Islam. And then it gets into, how these reformations happen and, what we hope to see in among those right-wing crazies in Islam. The book is From the Ashes, A Spiritual Response to the Attack on America. Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Tom Price was on the Tucker Carlson show night before last on Fox So-Called News. And Tom Price, a former Republican congressman from Georgia and a former physician, a medical doctor, now the head of HHW or HEW or HHS or whatever it's called. HHS, yeah. It's gone through 2 or 3 changes in my lifetime. And it just astonished me to hear this guy, I want to say lying through his teeth, but it's not quite that. It's like, he's like the master of weasel words, It's saying things that have very specific meaning to him, and to his Republican owners and to his petro-billionaire owners, the Koch network, but have a very different meaning to people watching Fox News who think they understand what he's saying when actually he's saying something else. And just to deconstruct that, for example, here's one clip from this. This is Tucker Carlson and Tom Price.
But now Republicans do have the power to do all of that, to replace Obamacare. And they're having a hard time. The Senate still hasn't passed a repeal bill, and that may be a good thing, according to the polls, which show that only 17% of Americans approve of the GOP plan to the extent they know what it is.
This is Tucker
Put that in
Carlson.
perspective, that's 5 points lower than the approval rating in this country for Vladimir Putin. Question is, what would this plan do for Americans? Some confusion about that still. Health and Human Services Secretary Thom Price joins us tonight to clear it up. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker. Good to be with you.
So you're trying to sell this plan to the public, but also to the Congress, and it's hard. It's always hard with this stuff. So if you were to narrow it down, tell me what the chief aim of this bill is. Is it to improve health outcomes, to control prices, or to expand coverage?
It's to stick to those principles of healthcare, making healthcare affordable, accessible, of the highest quality, and provide choices for patients. So it protects patients, provides more choices for patients, lowers costs, and strengthens Medicaid. That's it in a nutshell.
Wow. Wow. Now, Chris, I had said I wanted to get the piece where Tucker said, what about a person who lives in West Virginia, and his response to that? Do you know which one of these clips that is? Which one is that? Okay, let's play this. This is so that all sounds good, right? Obviously, it's not the case of what the Republicans are trying to do. But here's one other clip from Thom Price. Let's check this out. That's not working. Okay, we'll come back to this later. In the meantime, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Mike in South Bend, Indiana. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Yes. Hey, Tom. Love the show.
Thank you.
I just wanted to share with the listeners my recent experience as a green card holder crossing the border at the Rainbow Bridge earlier this month. I've had my...
Okay, hang on just a second, Mike. So you are a green card holder. In other words, you're not a U.S. citizen. But you and which bridge is this? Is this one that connects the U.S. to Canada?
Yeah. The Rainbow Bridge.
Okay.
I hold two passports, a Danish and a Canadian.
Okay.
So my wife and I had been up to Toronto to pick up my mom. So coming back across the border, there's three of us with three different passports, and I hand it to the officer at the gate there, and he goes, he asks who's who, and we tell him who's who, and then the next question is, why haven't you become a U.S. citizen? Which I routinely get every time I leave the country and come back in again.
Mm-hmm.
So I told him, I said, I really haven't had time, meaning that, number one, to start the process, it's $700. And then you can get the paperwork online, and then I would have to go up to Cleveland to turn in the paperwork, and then they give me an appointment time.
Well, why would they assume that you want to become a U.S. citizen in the first place?
Well, it gets better.
Okay.
So so I told him, the next words out of his mouth is, go park the car over there, go up to the second floor, and wait. And I'm like, okay. I says, wow, I'm being detained? That's never happened before. So we go up there, and we wait probably about 45 minutes, and families are coming and going. And finally I got up, and before the glass door closed, I asked one of the officers there, excuse me, sir, what am I doing here? I'd like to know. To which he turns to one of his partners, and he says, whatever his name was, he goes, we have one of them. And I said, excuse me, one of who? I said, you have somebody who doesn't know why I'm here. So the other gentleman says, okay, come over here to window 9. And I asked him again, I said, okay, will you please tell me what I'm doing here? I said, I think I have a pretty good idea of why I'm here. And he says, and then his response to that was, why haven't you become a U.S. citizen? I said, I wasn't under the impression that was a requirement when I had a green card. And he says, well, you've had it for a long time. Why haven't you become a U.S. citizen? I said, it's my choice, isn't it? I said, as far as I know, I haven't been contacted by the INS to turn in my old green card, which doesn't have an expiration date. The new ones have a 10-year limit.
Uh-huh.
And it went back and forth about why I hadn't become, to which point where I almost blew a gasket was when he said, if I caught you coming across the border with this card, I would have you come up here every single time. And I said, to which I replied, did you just threaten me with harassment for having a green card and not becoming a U.S. citizen? And he's like, no, I didn't harass. I said, well, you just threatened me with bringing me up here all the time. I said, he said, well, I don't know if you have a criminal record, because 80% of the cards or 80% of the people that I see with the old green cards have a criminal background. And I said, well, I don't know what the guy down there is doing, but my local law enforcement in Ohio can run my driver's license, and he can tell me if I have a criminal record. So again, what am I doing up here? And bottom line is, times have changed. And reflecting back on one of the earlier callers with the truck driver, a lot of I'm a trucker as well, and we're vetted. And if you have a hazmat license, you're vetted by the FBI.
Right.
So it's, I don't know, times are changing, and some of these guys are on their little, power trips.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just, it was unnerving for my mom, because she has the ETA and the ESTA to fly in and out of Canada and in and out of the U.S. So she's been vetted by Homeland Security and the Canadian Homeland Security. And he had the gall to say, well, I don't know if your mother's a criminal. I'm like,
wow.
She's 84 years old.
Wow.
So, yeah. And,
so it's like these ICE guys have got they've got their testosterone swagger going now, that Trump has basically empowered them to harass anybody who's not a U.S. citizen. Is that the bottom line here?
That's what I take away from this. That they're just going to, basically harass. I mean, I literally took it as a form of harassment, because it was a half a dozen times. Why haven't you become a U.S. citizen? And I was
That's incredible. I wonder if that's happening all over the country, or if that's just that particular office. Do you have any sense of that?
I don't know, but I hope it's an isolate. I hope it's not across the.
Well, if any of our listeners have had a similar experience, give us a shout and let us know. It's 202-808-9925. Mike, thanks for the call and thanks for listening on Sirius XM. And keep us up to date.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Okay, I'm just reading you the headline. Police. Poconos woman kills boyfriend after spat with reptilian cult. Yep. Welcome back. Virginia in Aspers, Pennsylvania, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Virginia, what's on your mind today?
I was just watching Donald Trump speaking on CNN.
Oh, you have my consolations.
He was talking about all the flaws with Obamacare and how the premiums have gone way up.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't it the Republicans that caused the premiums to go up by taking away the government subsidy for people with pre-existings?
Well, what they did is they took away the insurance company subsidy. Right. This was Marco Rubio doing away with something called risk corridors, and it was the insurance industry subsidy that was to make sure that if the insurance companies said yes, we'll go along with Obamacare, for the first decade while everybody was figuring out, as all these new people were coming into the system, the goal was not to bankrupt the insurance companies, and so the federal government would subsidize them during that first decade of that transition. And Marco Rubio inserted that legislation. Again, just Google Marco Rubio and risk corridors, and if you want the original article, it was in the New York Times. Add New York Times. And it'll pop right up. You can look at my Twitter feed. I've retweeted it 2 days in a row now. That was what drove
two things. Number one, that drove an increase in premiums, and number two, that caused a number of insurance companies to say, particularly in those states like Iowa that have used the Obamacare waivers to allow non-Obamacare compliant policies to be sold in their states, which is what Tom Price is talking about doing nationwide. That's what's breaking down Obamacare in those places where it's breaking down. And it's basically only breaking down in the red states because the Republicans are sabotaging it.
Well, why does after Trump says something like that on CNN, why doesn't CNN, et cetera, say, by the way, the high premiums are a result of Marco Rubio's actions?
They don't say it because that would require actual reporting, thoughtful analysis, rebutting what Republicans have to say. You have to keep in mind, Virginia, on my show, I don't care if politicians come on or not, right? I mean, Bernie was on here for 11 years, and then he went off to run for president and hasn't been back. He's gotten super busy. And it was really great that Mark Pocan said, hey, I'd love to be on your show regularly. But, we went a year or two with no politics. I don't need politicians. CNN cannot exist without politicians. If the Republican Party was to start saying, we're not going to go on CNN or MSNBC for that matter, the network their ratings would collapse because they wouldn't, they wouldn't have those politicians on. And so in order to keep Republicans happy and keep them coming back, they don't do what you just described, which is pointing out to Republicans when they're lying.
I have one other short little thing. You were talking about Revelations a couple weeks ago, and this applies to the environmental problems now, and so-called evangelical Christians who want to destroy the environment faster.
Yeah.
Revelations.
I shall destroy them who destroyed the earth.
Yes, those who just...
Yep, it's in Revelation 7. It's a line I'm very familiar with. Virginia, thank you. Thank you. Spot on. Thank you so much for the call. And yeah, by the way, the other thing out of Revelations is that the next time the world is destroyed, it'll be by fire. Would that be heat? Would that be global warming? I don't know. Anyhow, and I'm not even sure I believe in Revelation. Yeah. Anyhow, we'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and on the line with us with Talk Media News is Luke Vargas. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, the new book by Ellen Ratner. And hey, Luke, in New York.
Good afternoon, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for joining us, and please get tight on your microphone there. The French Armed Forces head has resigned. Didn't Trump convince the NATO countries to spend more on their defense?
Well, that's his belief, is that he's the one responsible for these countries taking seriously the military threats facing them and increasing their military budgets. The truth is obviously much more complicated than that. Let's talk about the French resignation first. This is General Pierre de Villiers. He's 60 years old. He led French forces in Kosovo. He's very experienced and has really put his reputation on the line trying to make sure the French armed forces have the funding that he believes they need to have such a large military footprint. I mean, as you look across the NATO countries, more than 20 countries, the big slogan we keep hearing, especially from President Trump, is that these countries have to spend 2% of their GDP on their military by the year 2020. That's actually a goal that NATO countries set for themselves several years ago. There was a big meeting in Warsaw following the Russian moves in Crimea and eastern Ukraine. And these countries got together and said, look, we're spending too little. We've got to hit this 2% of GDP target. As of a review that we just saw from NATO several weeks ago, there are only 6 countries, including the United States, that have hit that target. France is not one of them. And the pinch that they're feeling is that, unlike Germany or some of these other countries, the Netherlands or some of the Baltic states, which don't really have any troops deployed anywhere, the French really do have a large military footprint around the world with more than 30,000 active duty troops deployed to various countries, including in Mali in West Africa, where they've got more than 10,000 troops. So they really feel the need to have a big budget. Their brand new president, Emmanuel Macron, has said he'll hit 2% of GDP, but the general there said, look, you're not doing this fast enough. He testified in a committee last week saying, look, I'm not going to be pushed around. I don't give an F. He said, it was really quite inflammatory language. And Macron basically said, you're out of line. I'm the boss here. This is insubordination. Yeah. And all of that happened. You bring in Trump. This happened all during Bastille Week last week when President Trump was over there in France, when he was inspecting the French and American troops on the Champs-Élysées. So this was seen as sort of an embarrassment.
Yeah, I've read a couple of articles suggesting that Americans who think that Emmanuel Macron is like, the French version of Barack Obama or even Bill Clinton, really need to think again, that he has more authoritarian tendencies, that, he's more of a neoliberal even than Bill Clinton was, stuff like that.
The example being cited recently is sort of the fact that his recent comments about population in Africa, where he said, look, if you need an answer for the reason why Africa is having all these consistent problems with poverty and health, is that, you've got 7, children per every woman in some of these African countries, particularly in the former French colonies in Africa and Niger and other places that really have high birth rates. So people say that and said, oh, you're completely buying into the sort of clash of civilizations narrative. So in that regard, I think maybe he has some common ground with President Trump. But again, interesting to see this French Armed Forces chief resign today and say, look, you're gutting the French military, and we're not gonna put up with it any longer.
This next story I saw this morning. In fact, I printed it out to talk about today. In fact, Charles Sauer is going to be with us at the top of the hour, and he and I are going to be discussing the liberal versus the libertarian perspective on U.S. empire. Sure. And apropos of that, Turkey, which is a NATO member, has leaked to the press the secret sites where inside Syria, where we have troops, and we have troops there without the permission of the Syrian government, which really puts them on a razor's edge. And leaking that information is like saying to ISIS, hey, guys, bomb here. How the hell did this happen? What's going on?
Yeah, well, look, the Turks are furious with the fact that the United States is relying on support, training, and arming the Syrian Democratic Forces, which include the People's Protections Units, the Kurdish fighters in Syria, who have really, if anyone deserves, I think probably the lion's share of credit for liberating a lot of the majority of territory, particularly in northeastern Syria, rather, from the Islamic State, is these Kurdish forces. Turkey doesn't see it the same way. These forces are the linchpin of the American strategy against the Islamic State.
Go
ahead.
Doesn't Turkey not see it the same way because they've got a substantial Kurdish population, in the south of Turkey, and they're concerned. The Turkish Kurds, the Iraqi Kurds, and the Syrian Kurds have for close to a century, since the end of World War I, been trying to reconsolidate Kurdistan.
Yeah, well, the Kurds are the largest stateless population in the world, and considering their valor in Syria and Iraq, there's a case made by many people that they have more than earned their right to self-governance. The Turks do not agree with that. They do not agree with the U.S. policy of enabling these groups, even in the face of this terrorist threat. And they see, Turkey sees these groups and their affiliations to the PKK, the sort of group that's waging an insurgent campaign against the Turkish government, as an existential threat. They see the Kurdish threat as being higher than that of the Islamic State. And so one way of punishing, it seems, the United States for our support of those Kurdish groups was to use Anadolu News Agency, which is just across the wall from me here at the United Nations, to leak out today in both English and Turkish stories the exact coordinates of 10 different facilities in Syria where the United States has troops. Now, this is obviously, something that would put American lives in danger. I have to say, there's also, I think, a benefit for the U.S. public to know that we did have 10 facilities in Syria with troops in them. I mean, on one hand, obviously this is dangerous to leak out the coordinates, but there is some public interest, I think, back on our shores for knowing this. But yeah, that's, I mean, for NATO allies to be treating each other like that is certainly,
Is there any possibility that this could lead to Turkey's expulsion from NATO?
I think it is one of many things that could be pointed to make that case, but we have not seen moves yet to actually, push them out of the alliance. But certainly, just all the more ammunition to make that case for those who want to make it.
Yeah, and in the last minute we have here before we hit the break at the top of the hour, I understand dates have been set for the NAFTA negotiation talks. What does this mean?
Well, it's going to get started in about a month's time in Washington, 7 rounds. The goal here is to push these through before you have Mexican presidential elections next year, where it's very likely a government could be swept into power that really just wants to play rough with the United States, even rougher than the current government there. I have to say, though, everything we're hearing, and I just did a big set of interviews on NAFTA, is that the rapport is really, really bad between the United States negotiators and Mexican negotiators.
Oh, Pino Neta hates Trump, doesn't he?
Impossible to do. And a lot of U.S. industries, car manufacturers, the agriculture sector are very worried that they're going to lose the really good terms that NAFTA enshrined for them, that any renegotiation, opening this back up again, is almost bound to give them worse protections than they had when these deals were negotiated in the 90s, and the U.S. economy was all that more powerful relative to Canada and especially Mexico. So their thinking is like, why are we choosing now as a time, and why are we choosing a U.S. president with such poor relations with his negotiating partners? These are not preconditions for a deal that are going to set U.S. industries up for any success here. But alas, the negotiations are going to begin, and the goal, at least according to the U.S. trade negotiator, to try to get them done by early next year before Mexican political interference starts to play a role.
Right. Remarkable stuff. Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Tom. Bye-bye.
Great talking. We'll be back. Charles Sauer is going to be in the studio with me. We're going to be talking about American Empire, the American Empire. Is this really who we are? We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction. This is from Chapter 4. It's titled The Clathrate Gun. The deepest place on Earth, the deepest part of our oceans, is a massive canyon in the West Pacific called the Mariana Trench.
more than 35,000 feet deep. The pressure of the water is 1,000 times that of the surface of the ocean. At that depth, a normal submarine would collapse like a paper bag. There's very little life there, and what does live is adapted to cold, pressure, and darkness like nowhere else on Earth. The first man to dive solo to the bottom of the Mariana Trench was filmmaker James Cameron. A lay expert on the oceans, in part from his work making the movie Titanic, Cameron designed, funded, built, and in 2012 navigated his own submarine, the Deep Sea Challenger, into these icy depths. To say that James Cameron understands the ocean in a way that few other human beings ever could would be an understatement. From shallow dives to the deepest place on Earth, he knows the seas, and he knows about their methane cloth rates. As he told me earlier this year, quote, "The bottom line is that given the number of species expected to die off in the next century just due to climate change and the other effects of our industrial civilization, we are already in the middle of a mass extinction event equivalent to the lesser ones in paleo history, such as the KT extinction that took out the dinosaurs. So the Homo sapien isn't a species that's currently endangered. However, the cloth rate gun scenario, James Cameron said, changes that. It doubles down on an already bad situation, putting us on the hit list as well. Not literally, because some people probably will survive in highly artificial environments, meaning the species will perish, but the vast majority of humanity will perish." Cameron added, with a metaphor worthy of his brilliant Avatar movies, "We're talking about the survival of our kids. We collectively are playing Russian roulette. We're putting a gun to their heads and going click, 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 a cloth rate gun." Only discovered in the serious way in the 1960s, there is so much methane in the form of cloth rates, such as the frozen methane slurry on the floor of the continental shelves around the oceans of the world, that it's at least double all the known underground coal, oil, and gas on the entire planet. Peter Ward, the paleontologist at the University of Bristol, told me, quote, "Methane is way worse than carbon dioxide. It's inert right now in the soil. It's not affecting anyone in any way. When you warm it, though, it becomes a gas, and then it starts acting immediately as a greenhouse gas. So this is an immediate and very short-term threat to human civilization." For the last decade, a joint U.S.-Russia research team out of the International Arctic Research Center at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, has been exploring the East Siberian Sea. Arctic. They are looking at the bottom of the seafloor where once stable reserves of frozen methane have begun thawing and bubbling up into the atmosphere. Dr. Igor Semeletov told the research team in 2011. He told the British newspaper, The Independent, about what he found that year and the scope of the impending methane problem. Quote, "Earlier, we found torch-like structures like this, but they were only tens of meters in diameter. This is the first time that we found continuous, powerful, and impressive seeping structures more than 1,000 meters in diameter. It's amazing," end of quote. Amazing academically, that is. Horrifying for those of us who call planet Earth home. 1,000 meters is a kilometer, so this is one massive single methane leak, and it's a bit more than a half-mile in diameter. And it is just one of many. Dr. Smeletov added, quote, "I was most impressed by the sheer scale and high density of the plumes. Over a relatively small area, we found more than 100, but over a wider area, there should be thousands of them," end quote. Those sites would have been familiar during the Permian and other extinctions as well. As Paul Wignall explained to me, the significant thing about methane is it's a very effective greenhouse gas, so it causes global warming. Once you trigger warming, if you release methane, it's in positive feedback. It gets warmer and warmer as you release more methane into the atmosphere. So we think of this as a big part of the Permian extinction at that time. This is very rapid warming. Charles Dickens, who had proposed the methane link to the Permian mass extinction, told me, "We know that in the bottom of the seafloor, large parts of the ocean margins have methane in a solid phase. And what happens when you change the temperature, it can melt this frozen methane phase." He added, "The idea is that during some of these extinction events, we have some triggering that forces the ocean temperatures to warm, and then that melts the solid methane phase, which turns into gas and goes into the oceans and atmosphere." Paleontologist Michael Benton concluded, quote, "The risk is runaway greenhouse, which is when the self-correcting mechanisms cease to kick in, and you heat by a little bit and you release methane. That then causes excess heating and you release more methane, and so it goes on.
It's believed at the end of the Permian 250 million years ago, this kind of runaway greenhouse gas exacerbated the effect, making it, the Permian mass extinction, an awful lot worse. By 2010, it was said that 8 million tons of methane emissions were being released into the atmosphere every year. But researchers believe that, too, is an underestimate. More recent studies have shown a far more rapid increase in methane, CH4 concentration in the atmospheres. In the last 2 centuries, the amount of methane in the atmosphere has increased from 0.7 ppm to 1.7 ppm. That's the largest known increase in the history of the planet. The book, The Last Hours of Humanity.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And in the studio with me, Charles Sauer, libertarian economist and president of the Market Institute. MarketInstitute.org is the website. You can tweet him at Charles Sauer, S-A-U-E-R. Charles, welcome back to it.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I wanted to talk to you this week. We have very, very different visions of America and the world economically.
Yep.
You and I, we're at the extreme ends of the spectrum, I would say. And
we both want what's best, though.
Absolutely. I believe, I don't doubt that at all. And it's one of the reasons that I keep talking to you is that I think you're a no BS guy, even though I disagree with you. But that said, let's step out of the economic frame for a minute and talk about how liberals and libertarians view America as empire. This is a conversation that I'm really curious to have. Nafiz Ahmed wrote a piece for the Think Progress blog, I'm pretty sure. Oh no, it was Medium? Yeah, okay. It didn't print the footer here. So it's at medium.com, right? Okay, thank you, Troy. This was over at medium.com, and it's titled, Pentagon Study Declares American Empire is Collapsing. Report demands massive expansion of military-industrial complex to maintain, quote, global access to resources, which kind of tells you what we're all about. And this is from the study. This is what the Pentagon said. And I quote, while the United States remains a global political, economic, and military giant, it no longer enjoys an unassailable position versus state competitors. In brief, the status quo that was hatched and nurtured by U.S. strategists after World War II and has for decades been the principal beat of the Department of Defense is not merely fraying, but may in fact be collapsing. This is the Pentagon talking about U.S. primacy in the world collapsing. Yeah. The order and its constituent parts, back to quoting from the study, first emerged from World War II, were transformed to a unipolar system with the collapse of the Soviet Union. In other words, it was no longer us versus the Soviet Union. It was just basically us, and have by and large been dominated by the United States and its major Western and Asian allies, maybe Europe and Japan principally, and South Korea, since. Status quo forces collectively are comfortable with their dominant roles in dictating the terms of international security outcomes and resist the emergence of rival centers of power and authority. All states and traditional political authority structures are under increasing pressure from endogenous and exogenous forces, in other words, from within and from without. The fracturing of the post-Cold War global system is accompanied by the internal fraying, this is within our countries, in the political, social, and economic fabric of practically all states. This is reading something like, who wrote The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire?
Sorry, I'm not going to get it for you.
It's been 40 years since I read it. But in any case, this is that. It looks to me like we're looking at the end of empire, and yet we have this budget going forward that's over $600 billion for the military, under $600 billion, 500 and some odd billion dollars for everything else that our government does. Much of it, much vilified by you, I get that, but still, aren't these proportions out of whack? And why, why should American kids go to war fighting and dying in at least half the places in the world where we're?
This is a great topic, right? So first off, I've been in here week after week, month after month, and I always fight for free markets. And this is one place where it's interesting because you walk into a room full of Republicans who I'm used to being on my side on free markets, and then you start talking about military spending, and they say, no, we just need to expand. We need more. We need more. And you can hear it in a lot of places. The Heritage Foundation was for something called the alternative engine for our new plane, the I think it's the F-35. And they were for that alternative engine, although all of our military leaders were opposed to it. The president was opposed to it. The head of the Pentagon was opposed to it. Everybody in line with the program was opposed to it. But, you know, funding was important to them or their donors for the program.
So there's probably a path there from the company that makes that engine to a lobbying firm here in Washington, D.C., passing out money, not just to think tanks, but also to politicians.
The line is there, and that explains that part of it. But I was talking to some people about data privacy today, and you know, the rationality goes out the door when we start talking about foreign policy, because a lot of people are like, oh no, we're in trouble if we lose our data privacy. So the line is there on lobbying. So it's kind of like the perfect storm of bad policy on the right. The lobbying money's there. Plus this bad thoughts that, you know, anybody foreign is going to come hurt us or will hurt our country and our economy. And that's, of course, just wrong. But really where we get into this problem, I think, and I think it says it in that report, basically, is that as a country, we don't really have a foreign policy. The left doesn't necessarily have a foreign policy. The right doesn't necessarily have a foreign policy. You and I haven't talked about it that much. The libertarians are generally isolationists. I'm actually more of an objectivist. If you threaten us, I'm okay with military action. But that means something like Syria wouldn't have been something. You know, there's higher people on the list: China, Russia, Iran, and then you aren't just going to attack China or Russia. So you actually have to make rational decisions about how you're going to deal with them.
Right. And it's unlikely that Syria is ever going to do anything to the United States. I mean, you know, it's just like Saddam Hussein represented no threat to the United States. Afghanistan, Mullah Omar represented no threat to the United States. Yeah. So we're in agreement that much of this stuff is being driven by your much beloved capitalism that is infecting politics.
I think it's one of those weird areas where it's the perfect storm again. So I think the right has this bad mix of politics of the lobbying and isolationism. I think the left also has it where a lot of the left wants to be the global parent to come in and help some of these countries. So you see Syria and you see what is a bad situation in Syria. It was a bad situation for a lot of people. And so you want to go help, but the repercussions of that and what that means, putting the stick in the eye of some of the really bad people that aren't necessarily Syria or a country is a problem.
Using the military to help is almost an oxymoron. I mean,
yeah.
You know, if you're going to help people, that you send in, you know, Greenpeace or not even USAID. I mean, you know, we actually have government agencies that bring food in, you know, or fund the United Nations, humanitarian programs. But, you know, that's a whole completely different thing.
I think,
and how does this relate to the idea of the United States as empire, as worldwide empire?
So, I mean, I think that we view ourselves, we as an American people, I think Congress views us as an empire, and they see us going out. And what we tend to forget in the public policy realm is that every country has their different motivations. We see right now South Korea has their cabals. They have their Samsung, I think, is 20% of the South Korean economy, and they're defending Samsung using public policy. We see, you know, Russia acting in their own self-interest, Syria acting in their self-interest. We forget that we are not an empire, that other countries do act for themselves. And so when I hear that report, I hear things falling apart, but I hear somebody writing the report that still doesn't understand the point that the other countries are all acting in their self-interest.
Right. Well, there's two things that I wanted to raise. Number one is that, you know, when we had the Soviet Union, there was an ideology on the other side
communism.
Yeah.
And we fought communism to protect capitalism in theory, or to protect the capitalists. And so it wasn't a fight that I agreed with, frankly, but you could understand, okay, there's some ideology here. But now China is our biggest trade partner.
Yeah.
Or if not biggest, damn close. And Russia is no longer communist. They're outdoing us in terms of capitalism, in terms of, laissez-faire capitalism, libertarian capitalism, as it were. So it's like, what's the purpose of empire if you don't have, why be Superman if there's no Lex Luthor, number one. And number two, there's this theory about the collapse, about wars, what provokes wars, that the number one thing that predictably will start a war is when a great power begins to disintegrate at the same time, or begins to diminish in its power at the same time that a previously non-great power becomes a great power. And we're seeing now China has surpassed the United States economically just in the last 2 years as the largest economy in the world. And they're going to get way ahead of us. I mean, they got 1 billion people. We only have 300 million. And they are industrializing like nobody's business, and they're using the exact same trade policies we used in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s to build the American middle class. They're doing that with the China. So, this could put us in a position of war. Your thoughts on those two points?
I see that happening. I look at China a little differently, and I see the way that business is reacting to China a little differently. I see that Congress doesn't quite understand what's going on. But, China had their renaissance, and they started celebrating intellectual property. They now file more patents every year than
any other country in the world.
Than any other country in the world. And not only do they file those patents, but they're also protecting them. And so that means some of our intellectual property cases are going over there. And that's that research and development. That's what keeps the U.S. ahead of other countries. And so I don't think that the U.S. businesses are just going to necessarily lay down and give up, though. I think that they're going to fight. And so they're
going to fight for their cheap labor?
I don't think that means going to war. I think that I don't see war as the necessary first outcome. Maybe as we progress down the line, that's but I see China, if they surpass us and the economic fight doesn't win, I see the war being pretty far down the road.
Yeah, I would hope so, and common sense would indicate that. But this whole historical perspective, really gives one pause. And at the same time, I mean, China is developing the Spratly Islands, and they're saber rattling over Taiwan. And then Donald Trump made this terrible faux pas of calling the Taiwanese, new president and congratulating them. And China's not happy right now. So, and then we got North Korea in the mix. It's getting very, very messy. Anyhow, I wanted to get your thoughts on that, Charles. And Charles Sauer, libertarian economist and president of the Market Institute, marketinstitute.org. You can tweet him at Charles Sauer, SAUER. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Bruce in Dallas, Texas, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Bruce, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I was just looking at the way things are right now, and I was thinking about the inexorable hold that wealth has over society and over our governments, and not just our government, but governments around the world, especially in Western societies. And I don't really see a way out for us politically if we don't change our economic system fundamentally.
I don't disagree with you, Bruce. I think, though, that you're not going to change your economic system without political change. This was the lesson of the FDR administration, for example. FDR came in.
I understand that economics is politics and politics is economics, but as long as you have concentrations of wealth and these great inequities, how can you have a political system that creates equality?
Yeah, well, that's where I was going with that logic. Is you know, you have oligarchs now. We now have an oligarchy in the United States, and we've got a group of a couple of hundred oligarchs who pretty much are running this country right now by proxy, through the Republican Party, which they own, and those oligarchs are not going to let go of they're not going to let go of their economic power, certainly, and they're maintaining their economic power by virtue of government monopolies and the failure of the federal government to enforce, things like the Sherman Antitrust Act, stuff like that. And so they will paralyze politics to their own benefit. And that is imperiling the United States tremendously, just as it was in the late 1920s. And that's why I think that, we're looking at the possibility of some kind of god-awful crash. So,
well, I think that the real estate market is really, let's just say, tentative right now, for lack of a better word, because you have all these people buying up properties as investment properties that are remaining vacant. You have housing shortages in major cities, or I should say affordable housing shortages in major cities.
Right.
I live in a neighborhood that's being gentrified currently, and what used to be a $700 apartment is now a $13 a hundred apartment 5 years later.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, people are being priced out. The public transportation system is not keeping up with where people have to move to be able to afford to get to their jobs. And this is the way they want it. It's that whole worker instability theory. I think you might have mentioned it on your show a couple of weeks ago, where workers are being completely kept off balance so that we can't mobilize, we can't act. And I'm wondering if there's any way out of this short of an actual upheaval.
I doubt it, frankly. I think that, but that's not to say that an upheaval is a bad thing. I mean, it's it depends on what what form the upheaval takes. I think we had an extraordinary opportunity with the election of 2008, and President Obama chose not to prosecute banksters and not to fundamentally change our economy. And Eric Holder chose not to prosecute banksters, and apparently he's now cashing in on that decision. Which is a real tragedy. But I wrote a piece about this that's up at Alternet right now. A 21st century form of indentured servitude has already penetrated deep into the American heartland. And we're seeing more and more of this. So, Bruce, I am very concerned because history shows us in the United States, whether it's the Great Crash of 1929, the Great Crash of 1857, or the Great Crash of 1772, that it basically takes an economic disaster to produce a political realignment. Bruce, thanks a lot for the call. Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Rudy in Riverside, Illinois, listening to WCPT. Hey, Rudy, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hello, Tom. You were talking about parasites in the immune system.
Yeah, and specifically how it relates to Alzheimer's. This, if you go to NewYorkTimes.com, it's one of the top, most forwarded, most emailed stories right now. You can easily read the article.
Well, yeah, okay. This is a few years ago now, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, or a little longer. Dr. Joel Weinstock at the University of Iowa Hospital, the Tufts Center, he had a woman patient whose immune system was attacking her colon. He gave her a cocktail of worm larvae, and that stopped it from being attacked. And so, in essence, he cured her with that treatment.
Yes, and
his theory is, and other doctors are, that there's a enzyme or a protein that these parasites project into your intestinal tract to keep your immune system regular, keep it normal.
Right.
And he has said that people don't understand that we are close to nature like every other animal on the planet.
Yes.
So,
and these human specific ones, the Necatora americanus, which is the hookworm, the human hookworm, and I forget the name for the roundworm, the botanical name. We co-evolved with these things. So throughout through millions of years of evolution, our immune systems were always depressed by, let's say 10 to 15%, something like that, just, slightly depressed, because the parasites in the gut, they secrete proteins that downregulate the immune system so we don't expel them. So, so they have established a way of coexisting with us by indirectly regulating our immune system. And so what that means is that absent the parasites, our immune systems are running 10 or 15% hotter than they should. And that pops up in these symptoms of everything from plaque psoriasis to multiple sclerosis to lupus to MS. I guess I already said that. Possibly Crohn's disease. There's a whole bunch of, and now they're saying that one of those conditions that's the result of the immune system attacking the body is Alzheimer's. And it's just an amazing, amazing article. And I had a friend, his name is Jasper, and he was living on the West Coast, and he was selling hookworms for humans to use therapeutically. The FDA came and basically threatened him with prison. So he moved to Europe, where he's now making them for the National Health Service. Was making them for the National Health Service in the UK. They were doing all kinds of trials on them. It's been a while. It's been a couple of years since I've talked to him. I'm not sure where it's at, but it really should be available.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
The therapeutic Helminth, Helminth. You can Google it. Anyhow, we'll be back with more right after this.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club reading today from Screwed, The Undeclared War Against the Middle Class and What We Can Do About It. This is from one of the last chapters, chapter 13. It's titled Setting the Rules of the Game, and the subchapter Gaming the System. If government can create conditions that cause a middle class to emerge by implementing fair rules for business, progressive taxation, free public education, the opposite is also true. Government can create a corporatocracy by deregulating business, by cutting taxes on extreme wealth, and by privatizing as much of the commons as possible. Conservatives call this starving the beast. Here's how you starve the beast. You put through tax cuts for the rich, which cuts back the revenues of the federal government to the point that if you got rid of all the social programs, you'd have a balanced budget. No more Social Security, no more spending for education, no more spending for Medicare and Medicaid. Let the government simply keep the armies, prisons, and police. Let's shrink government. That's their philosophy. When you cut all those social programs, you lose the middle class, and in its place, create a very small, wealthy elite and a large underclass of starvation wage workers. You lose democracy and instead create corporatocracy. You change the rules of the game. We, the people, lose, and the feudal lords win. Cons have been winning this particular game of starve the beast since Reagan first started seriously playing it in 1981. They've done it in large part by lying to the American people. And they've had to do that because if they told the truth, the majority of Americans would throw them out of office. This is, after all, still a democracy. If the majority of us agree to get rid of Social Security so that only the wealthy can have retirement benefits and the old are left to fend for themselves, so be it. If a guy breaks his neck and can't work and the majority of us decide not to help people who are disabled, and as a result he has to beg on the street, well, we can democratically decide to screw him and ourselves. But the conservatives are not having this debate in an open and honest fashion. They're not asking we, the people, if we want to get rid of, for example, the Head Start program. They could ask, do we want to invest in our youth or not? We know that if we invest in educating the very young, fewer of them will become criminals. It will save us money over the long term. But the majority will say, the majority of us say, no, we would rather pay $50,000 to imprison them later than pay $300 to put them in a Head Start now. If we said that, then that's fine. It's a democracy. But that's not the way the cons are doing it. Instead of explaining why it would be better for Americans to give all their money to the corporate elite, they're giving huge tax cuts to the rich while pretending that the tax cuts benefit all Americans. Instead of arguing that Americans should not expect the right to health care or security in their own old age, they are promoting a government crisis by handing to the rich the money we're borrowing from China, Japan, and Korea in the name of our grandkids. They're borrowing so much money from these countries that if they so much as blink, our currency could crash. And that's just what the most ideological of the conservative elite want. They want an economic crisis because they figure that's the only way they can force a cut in spending on social programs. In 2004, they thought that they had starved the beast enough, and they sent Bush out on the campaign trail to advocate getting rid of Social Security, privatizing it, putting it in the hands of Wall Street. But it didn't work. Turns out we, the people, apparently like Social Security. So the cons went back to starving the beast. Bush instead passed a new series of tax cuts with more to follow. The cons are trying to play the game so that the rich benefit while the rest of us lose out. They get tax cuts, we get program cuts. That's not a free market. That's a market that's being created for the benefit of the rich at the expense of the middle class. The question Americans have faced since the first arguments between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton in the 1780s was whether the game of business should be played with the primary goal of enriching the few, or, while allowing the few to enrich themselves, enhancing the quality of the life of the many. The cons suggest that if the rich win first, benefits will trickle down to the rest of us. Protecting workers, they say, will produce abnormalities and dislocations from a so-called free market. For example, they suggest that when minimum wages are fixed by government and labor can lawfully bargain to increase wages by increasing scarcity of labor through union actions, the result is an increase in prices, ultimately hurting the working person. But the economists they often cite in this thinking, David Ricardo, disagreed that raising wages first increased prices. He noted, quote, on the contrary, a rise of wages from the circumstance of the laborer being more liberally rewarded or from a difficulty of procuring the necessities on which wages are expended does not, except in some instances, produce the effect of raising price, but has a great effect in lowering profits, end of quote. In other words, all that talk about keeping wages down to keep prices down is a smokescreen. Business owners want to keep wages down to keep profits up. And when wages go down, profits do indeed go up. American wages have been falling steadily since Reagan first reintroduced conservative economics in 1980. And American corporations are generally more profitable than they've been in decades. In part, this is not only because wages are going down within the United States, but also because U.S.-level wages are being replaced by India and China-level wages through offshoring and outsourcing. But offshoring isn't a problem for American workers, the cons shout. It's the increase in productivity. American businesses need fewer workers because of automation. This is a tragic lie, and it's been bought hook, line, and sinker by most American politicians and even some economists. The book is Screwed.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Stories we cover and the issues we care about are at hartmanreport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation.
Plug my microphone in. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I mentioned an hour ago, I think, we had some clips from this Fox News Tucker Carlson piece where Tucker on Fox so-called News was talking to Tom Price, the former congressman from Georgia, who is now the head of HHS, and you know, in charge of your health care if you have Medicare or Medicaid. And it was just astonishing to me how Price is just lying through his teeth. Check this out.
I think it's worth paying attention to
Sure.
it. It's meaningful. So how would Trump voters be affected by it? West Virginia, for example, was like 68%, I think, of West Virginians voted for Donald Trump. About 30% of this whole state is on Medicaid. This legislation, I think, would reduce Medicaid payments. I think that's a fair thing to say. So how would they fare under this, West Virginia?
For those individuals on Medicaid who were eligible for Medicaid previously, there's essentially no change whatsoever. Over a period of time.
Now, no, number one, that's a lie, right? For those individuals on Medicaid, no change whatsoever. Yeah, for the first 2 years. But over the long term, you're screwed. Okay, back to Tom Price.
Over a period of time, those individuals that are on Medicaid but were able-bodied adults, they would transition to a personal market, a private.
Pause it right there. Okay, in other words, as we cut the Medicaid rolls, if you are able-bodied, you get to transition to the personal marketplace. Now, what does that mean? Buy your own damn insurance, right? That's what Tom Price is saying. He's saying if you're on Medicaid, and by the way, people who are on Medicaid are on Medicaid. Most people on Medicaid are actually either children, the elderly, or the working poor. So Tom Price wants, I get it. Republicans want to do away with child labor laws. I'm not sure that's exactly what Tom Price is pitching for here, but it could be. Who knows? But basically, he's saying that if you're able to work, even if you live in West Virginia and there's no jobs, you're going to have to buy your own damn health insurance. We're not going to give you Medicaid anymore. Back to Price.
Them and allow them to purchase the kind of coverage that they want. Virtually everybody's prices will come down for the premiums that they pay for their coverage, and they will get coverage that's more responsive to them. So we strengthen the Medicaid system, we drive prices down, we increase choices. That's what patient-centered healthcare is all about.
Right. So we drive prices down. How do we do that? By allowing the insurance companies to offer plans that suck. Junk insurance. Right? They're going to be selling junk insurance again, like they have been for, decades, maybe a century. I don't know how long insurance has been a big deal in the United States, but, throughout my lifetime. And back to junk insurance policies, and that, therefore, gives you more choice. You can buy this junk policy, that junk policy, this junk policy, or this real policy if you actually have enough money. But forget about Medicaid, because that's not the government's job. Basically, that's their sales pitch. I just, astonished me. And as I'm watching this, I'm thinking, the average Fox viewer does not realize what Tom Price is saying. And Tucker Carlson is not going to translate it into plain English like I did. And this is how Fox and the whole right-wing billionaire-funded machine, and of course Fox is funded by Rupert Murdoch, the billionaire, how the whole billionaire oligarch machine manipulates people who vote for Republican, basically. And it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for the people. It's a tragedy for America. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to WCPT.
Yes, the great WCPT.
Indeed.
That's where I hear Professor Thom Hartmann every day.
Thank you, George. What's up?
I was thinking that your PhD stands for Purveyor of High-Level Dialogue.
I love it. So what's on your mind?
But after what you said about the gut today, you're a professor of healthy digestion.
Okay. All right.
One quick thing before my main point. I'm a former truck driver, and I can tell you that your earlier caller was absolutely correct when he talked about the background investigation and vetting if you have the endorsement on your CDL for hazardous materials.
Right.
The security agencies and Homeland Security, your own state, the FBI, they all want to know that you're not the kind of person that's going to take a 53-foot road trailer full of explosive into a downtown area and let it go.
Right. Which just makes sense.
Yeah.
But then to have the state say, oh, but you're going to have to jump through, like all these hoops and take 6 months to get a driver's license just because you want to vote or just because you want to renew your license for that matter. And we're making it hard for you to renew your license just because we're trying to suppress the vote. That's nuts.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk to you about the subject you brought up earlier about the voting machines. About 3 or so years ago, there was an advertisement on WCPT that a group of scientists and technicians from the Argonne National Laboratory, which is the Department of Energy facility in southwest suburban Chicago, it was where the Manhattan Project moved after they finished the first reactor at the University of Chicago, and it exists to this day. They have a safety and security division that specializes in testing security systems and locks of all kinds. You know, particularly the kinds of things that safeguard nuclear reactors and nuclear bombs and chemical plants. And they are essentially scientific lock pickers and breaking and entry specialists. And they had a lecture at a local college where they explained all the easy ways that you can break into these voting machine systems, some of which can be done by a kid with electronics aptitude who buys parts at a Radio Shack store.
And some can be done just by sticking a USB drive in.
Yeah. And also they said there's other low-tech things. Like, for example, during off years when there's no election, where are the voting machines stored? Usually in some obscure county building or in the basement of City Hall in a room that has maybe a basic lock on it. Someplace it's easy to get into. And then all the machines have the same access door with the same lock on the back of them. So if you have one key, you can get into all of them.
Yep.
I mean, this lecture lasted over 2 hours, and I was like stunned and in a daze when I walked out because that you cannot secure an electronic system. It is not possible. The only thing that works is paper ballots, and that's what the Democrats should advocate, a PBI, the Paper Ballot Initiative, in every state and for the whole country.
Yep. Bernie Sanders has been calling for that for over a decade, as have a lot of us, and I completely, completely agree, George. And yeah, and your story about how insecure these machines are, spot on. George, I got to move along, but thank you for your call. Thank you for your kind words, and thanks for listening to WCPT. Paolo in Bristol, UK. Hey, Paolo, what's up?
Hi, Thom. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for waiting on hold. If I'd caught that you were in the UK, I would have put you on the air earlier. My apologies. What's up?
Okay, no worries. Okay, so look here, because I've been watching these town halls and how the resistance has been going on over where you are, where they say that they're telling us that there's so much success stories, but I am a bit skeptical about whether these are actually going to work long term, because I have a feeling that because relating to your discussions earlier, I do have a feeling the Republicans have a lot of tools up their trade. Because my question to you is, what's the incentive for Republicans to listen to these town hall outbursts? What's their incentive if they have voter suppression, if they have Koch brother money to bankroll them, and if they're seated in gerrymandered districts? So I just don't get the incentive for them to listen, to take in whatever their voters are telling them.
Paulo, you're absolutely right, and this is why they're not listening. This is why Paul Ryan will not hold a public town hall. He only does these phony telephone events, and that's true of virtually every Republican elected to federal office. They will not hold public town halls. They will not meet with their constituents. They are cowards. Well, they're hustlers. They're scam artists. They're taking their money from the petro-billionaires, from the fossil fuel industry, from the drug industry. They're taking this, and the tobacco industry. They're taking this money. They're doing, and the banking industry. They're doing the bidding of these people, and they don't give a damn, about its impact on us, or about our opinions about it. And that is the death of democracy. I mean, it's just a terrible, terrible thing to say, but we are, in my opinion, we are looking at the death of democracy in our republic here, and you've got it there in the UK. It happened with Thatcher in '78. It happened with Reagan in '80. It was the beginning of the end of functioning liberal democracies in both our countries, and it's really sad. Paulo, thanks so much for the call. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. John in Sparks, Nevada. Hey, John, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech on DirecTV.
Okay, roundworms and hookworms.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, as you were talking about earlier. And the most recent book, I think, by Dr. David Perlmutter, who's an MD, neurologist, member of the American College of Nutrition, and winner of the Linus Pauling Award. So, he's a conventional or standard, but a very bright MD. And his book, the subtitle is The Power of Gut Microbes to Heal and Protect Your Brain for Life.
Wow.
And it's a total book, totally going over the whole subject of all the microbes which those roundworms and other redworms or whatever bring into your body.
Yeah.
But when babies go through the birth canal of their mother being born, they get the mother gives them, that birth canal gives them a population of microbes.
That's correct. That's why children who are born by C-section have a higher risk of developing asthma later in life.
And he goes into, in his book, he talks about that and how you can induce a microbial population in babies who have gone through the C-section.
Right. Also, breastfeeding does that because mom, the microbes actually live in the armpits, which is one of the reasons we have BO. And as those microbes migrate across to the nipple, and then the baby, the
baby gets some with breast milk.
Yep.
Absolutely. But in the dust jacket of his book, they say that his rates of neurological disorder skyrocket.
Yes. And that's just bacteria, John. When I'm talking about, hookworms and roundworms, and arguably pinworms, those are the three types of really non-pathological, worms that affect humans. But hookworms and roundworms are the ones that have been most studied in terms of dealing with things like MS and lupus and other autoimmune conditions. Those are multi-cell, complex multi-cell organisms. Those are animals that we are coexisting with, as opposed to bacteria.
But the vagus nerve, one of the things he goes into, the vagus nerve connects your brain to your intestine.
That's correct.
And the word vagus is sort of a derivative, not a derivative, of the word vagabond.
Mm-hmm.
And the movement of microorganisms from your gut to your brain, that's part of your healthy system if you got the right microorganisms.
Well, I think it's that the microorganisms in your gut regulate or produce their own proteins, their own, the equivalent of neurotransmitters. And there's now a fairly large body of evidence that people who have gut imbalances, in other words, they get the bad flora instead of good flora, bad bacteria instead of good bacteria, that causes, there's a whole variety of things that seem to be associated with it, from obesity to type 2 diabetes to depression.
That's right. Oh, he goes into the possible mental problems that you have because you don't have the right, what he calls the biome in your gut that, like you said, produces not only the proteins, but has control and effect on your whole immune system.
Yep. It's regulating your immune system and it's regulating your nervous system. I'm with you, John. And by living in such a sterile world, I wonder to what extent that might have something to do with the autism epidemic. Anyhow, John, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Donald in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Donald, what's on your mind today?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, I wonder if our good president could be doing a little treasonous act and is getting together with our Russian counterpart. Number two, why haven't the Democrats stepped up and bought up a lot of TV stations and communications like the Republicans have, and therefore get our message out to the general public?
Yeah. With regard to question number one, I think that we need to have a conversation in this country about who represents a threat to us around the world and who doesn't, and what those threats are. Instead, we have kind of devolved to finger pointing, but that's a fairly large topic.
Your second point was, I'm sorry, remind me.
Why haven't the Democrats, and there are some billionaires that
that's right, yeah,
democracy bought communications, TVs and stations and newspapers and so forth and radio and present the Democratic side of things like Fox News has?
Yeah, it's a damn good question. I mean, there are, it's not just Fox. It's like Sinclair Broadcasting is fixing to become the largest owner of television stations in the country. And every night they've got these or regularly they have these must-run right-wing editorials that they run. You've got newspapers around the country that are being bought up by right-wing companies. It is astonishing. And the reason why you have that on the right and not on the left, Donald, and it's not just in the United States, by the way. You see this all over the world. And the reason why is because the right-wingers are making an investment. If Rupert Murdoch spends $1 billion launching Fox News, which is about what he did, he lost $100 million a year for 5 years. That's $500 million launching Fox News before it actually started making money. If he, invests that $500 million, he's probably going to make $5 billion in tax cuts over time. So, he's going to get his money back. Whereas if a billionaire, if Tom Steyer was to come along and say, oh, hey, let's build a television network, progressive television network, that's going to cost $500 million, he's going to see his taxes go up. So it's not an investment. It's an investment in civil society. And thank God, we've got people like George Soros and Tom Steyer who are willing to invest in civil society, but they're not that rich, and certainly not anywhere close to the riches of the Koch brothers and the Koch network. And there's not a big organization of left-wing billionaires who are throwing hundreds of millions of dollars. There's some of them who are throwing thousands and smaller amounts, but it just and I think that's the reason. And it's not, again, as I said, this is not just limited to the United States. So, Donald, thank you for the call. Gary in McDonough, Georgia. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Let me take you off speaker.
Thank you, Gary. I appreciate that. Gary?
Yeah. Tom, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, listen, I just wanted to agree with something that Donald said about Democrats on pushing back against the media. And I know your response yesterday was similar to some of your others, which you're right about. When the Progressive Caucus has a press conference, they may have cameras and recordings there, but they don't really broadcast.
That's correct.
But the difference, I would say, is those senators and congressmen who get their face on CNN or MSNBC whenever they're talking about an issue, they need to be pushing back. I mean, because they're talking live. I mean, Republicans get on there and lie about markets collapsing, premiums going up, and just overall lies. And we get Democrats on there with a level of decency and decorum when they're talking. It's almost like they're speaking in code. And, I mean, and if they can't say that Republicans are lying, why not specifically saying that they're not telling the truth and be specific about, point out that Marco Rubio introduced risk corridors a couple years ago, which
killed the risk corridors.
Obamacare to fail in certain areas.
Yep. Yeah, I think, it may well be that most of them don't even know it, because the people who would tell that story, like me, and, well, it's not just me. I mean, it's just there's really not that many. On the right, you've got all these think tanks and all these media outlets that are funded by the billionaires that will take a storyline and echo it 100,000 times to the point where everybody in America knows it and believes it to be true, whether it's true or not. On the left, there's nothing like that. And frankly, we need to be building something out like that. Gary, thank you for the call. Amen to everything you said. Andrew in Scottsdale, Arizona. Hey, Andrew, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Oh, okay. Well, just in response to the last caller, on Morning Joe this morning, Tim Kaine came on. He didn't talk about risk corridors, but he talked about something similar as a way to bring down the premiums for insurances. And then right after Tim Kaine, they had an Oklahoma Republican congressman talking about the Democrats. They're not saying anything. They're not doing anything. And, of course, Joe Scarborough just agreed with him, say, yep,
sure.
yep.
Yeah. Joe claims he's left the Republican Party. I think all he's done is left the Trumpistas, and, well, you know, we'll see. But excellent point. Excellent point, Andrew. Thank you for calling and making it. Kim in Nashville, Tennessee. Hey, Kim, thanks for listening on Sirius XM. What's up?
Yeah, good afternoon. I've got a question for you. As you and I both know, the software for these voting machines is proprietary. If they haven't done it already, what is to prevent them from programming in the cross-check lists into the voting machines or whatever handles the votes as they're tallied?
What would prevent that is that the machine doesn't know who you are. You don't get to the machine or you don't get to a ballot until you've already been through a person who verifies that you are who you say you are. And at that point, then your ballot becomes anonymous. But the big thing with the voting machines, check out Fraction Magic. In fact, you know, go to YouTube and plug in Fraction Magic and Mimi Kennedy, and you'll get the whole story, or at least part of the story of the perfidy of these things. Kim, I gotta move along, but thank you for the call. Tom in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Tom, we got 1 minute till the end of the show. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Love your show.
Thank you.
You were bringing up some issues regarding immunity, autoimmune diseases and things like that, and I think gut bacteria or flora. There's a gentleman by the name of Roy Swank back in probably the 50s or the 60s that was having very good success with treating multiple sclerosis with diet, basically, and whether that altered the immune system, whether it changed the bacteria in the gut, or whether it just, what he ended up doing was avoiding a lot of animal products and things. Right. And there's something called a molecular mimicry that some of the theories go on, that your immune system sees some of these animal products and things and recognizes them as your own tissue. And
That's
then
right.
all of a sudden starts not only attacking the animal products that it has seen, but that may be getting into lesions in the gut or something.
Well, not only that, people who eat high animal protein diets tend to have a different gut bacteria profile from people who are vegetarian or vegan, and it's not as healthy a one. And that's, you know, I believe that's one of the reasons why meat eaters are at a higher risk for colon cancer, in addition to other conditions, heart disease and other things as well. Tom, thanks for adding that to the conversation. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the call. And thank you all for being with us today. It's another fascinating day as we continue rolling down this crazy train called the Trump administration. Weird times, but it, you know, as the old Chinese curse goes, it's an interesting time to be alive. So don't forget, democracy requires you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Hidden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242.
Or visit tomsbeets.com.